The judge was about to close the hearing when a 10-year-old boy stood up and asked to question the witness.
Please, just one question.
District Attorney Roland Vance rose immediately, furious that a child was being allowed anywhere near the case.
Grief does not make a child an expert.
Caleb, you do not have to carry this. I already told them what I remembered.
Judge Helena Cross had seen families cry before, but the boy did not look ready to perform. He looked terrified.
One question, nothing more.
Please let them hear him this time.
Caleb had to stand on a wooden step just to reach the microphone adults had ignored for 2 years.
You all trusted the time, but no one checked it.
Vance called the conviction airtight, but the child's calmness revealed the first crack in his confidence.
Choose your words carefully, boy.
Hidden inside a photograph everyone had already seen was a mistake that had stolen 2 years from an innocent man. Silas watched his son prepare to ask the question every trained adult had failed to ask.
The truth is still here. That sign, I only turned it after closing.
Then Caleb asked the one question no one else had thought to ask.
What time did your store close on Sunday nights?
Long before Caleb Turner stood in that courtroom, before reporters knew his name, and before one simple question threatened to tear apart a prosecutor's perfect conviction, he knew his father as the man who could make forgotten clocks speak again. Silas Turner owned a narrow repair shop on the oldest street in Briar Creek. The sign above the door read, Turner Clockworks, though time and rain had faded some of the gold lettering. Inside, the walls were crowded with mantel clocks, pocket watches, brass carriage clocks, wooden regulators, and tall grandfather clocks whose pendulums moved with the patience of men who had seen generations come and go. The shop never sounded completely quiet. Even after closing, even when Silas turned off the lights and locked the front door, dozens of clocks continued ticking in different rhythms. Some ran fast, some ran slow. Some chimed several seconds apart, filling the darkness with imperfect music. Caleb loved that sound. While other children spent their afternoons watching cartoons or throwing balls in the street, Caleb sat on a tall stool beside his father's workbench. His feet did not reach the floor, so they swung beneath him while he watched Silas work beneath the yellow light of a desk lamp. Silas handled every clock as if it were alive. He never forced a rusted gear. He never twisted a hand that resisted. He listened first. He watched. He removed each screw carefully, placed every tiny part on dark velvet, and searched for the smallest sign of damage. To most people, a broken clock was only an object that no longer worked. To Silas, it was a witness. A worn tooth on a gear meant the movement had been carrying too much strain. A bent minute hand meant someone had tried to reset it too roughly. A faint scratch inside the case could reveal that an earlier repairman had installed the wrong part. Nothing stopped without a reason, Silas often told Caleb. Every failure left a trace. Caleb remembered one afternoon when an elderly woman brought in a pocket watch wrapped in a white handkerchief. It had belonged to her husband and had not ticked since the morning he died. She could not afford a proper restoration, but she asked Silas whether he could make it run just once more. Silas worked on that watch for 3 evenings. When the woman returned, he placed it gently in her palm. The watch began ticking, soft but steady, and the woman closed her fingers around it as tears filled her eyes. She tried to pay, but Silas refused. He told her some repairs were worth more than money. Ruth Turner loved her husband for moments like that, though she also worried about them. Kindness did not pay the rent. Sentiment did not buy groceries. Their life was always balanced between enough and almost enough. Ruth worked mornings, cleaning rooms at a motel near the highway, and covered evening shifts at a laundromat when bills grew too heavy. Silas repaired clocks, watches, music boxes, and occasionally old mechanical toys. Caleb did his homework at the front counter and ate dinner from paper containers when Ruth worked late. They were not wealthy, but their home had warmth. Silas laughed easily. Ruth sang while cooking. Caleb fell asleep most nights, hearing the faint ticking of the small brass travel clock his father kept beside the kitchen window. Silas had one lesson he repeated more than any other. When time is wrong, everything built on it becomes wrong too. At first, Caleb thought his father was only talking about clocks. A minute hand, placed incorrectly, could cause the chime to strike at the wrong hour. One gear installed out of position could throw the entire mechanism out of rhythm. A small mistake hidden inside the case could make every movement afterward incorrect. Caleb had no idea that those words would one day become the key to his father's freedom. The day everything changed was Sunday, March 10th. It was the first morning after daylight saving time began, the yearly adjustment that pushed clocks forward by 1 hour. Silas disliked it. He spent half the morning walking through the shop, resetting every clock one by one, while Caleb followed him with a notebook. Ruth teased him for treating the time change like a national emergency. Silas replied that people should not move time around carelessly, and then act surprised when the world became confused. Caleb laughed. By midnight, none of them would find the joke funny. Marlowe's Corner Market sat beside County Road 17, a small convenience store with 2 aging gas pumps, a flickering soda sign, and a bell above the entrance that rang half a second after the door opened. Owen Marlowe had owned the store for more than 30 years. After his wife died, the market became more than a business. It gave him somewhere to go each morning, and a reason to keep speaking to people. Behind the register hung a red rooster wall clock. The paint was chipped, one wooden wing was cracked, and the pale face had yellowed with age. Owen's wife had bought it during the first year of their marriage. Even after she died, Owen could not bring himself to remove it. 2 weeks before the robbery, that clock had stopped. Owen considered throwing it away, but Silas offered to repair it. He cleaned the movement, replaced a worn spring, realigned the hands, and stayed long enough to make sure it kept accurate time. When Owen asked what he owed, Silas charged him only for the replacement part. The red rooster clock began ticking again behind the register. No one understood then that it would become the most important witness in Briar Creek. On the night of March 10th, a man entered Marlowe's Corner Market wearing a dark coat and a cap pulled low over his face. The security camera was old and mounted near the ceiling, creating a grainy image that hid more than it revealed. The man appeared tall. His shoulders were broad. His walk looked slightly uneven. He threatened Owen, forced him to open the register, took the cash bag, and left through the front entrance. The security footage displayed a timestamp of 8:18 p.m. Owen called 911 in a frightened, breathless voice. The emergency dispatch system recorded his call at 9:22 p.m. That 1 hour difference should have stopped the investigation before it began. Someone should have asked why a terrified store owner, who claimed to call immediately after the robber left, had waited more than an hour. No one did. The camera said 8:18, and the number appeared clean, mechanical, and official. It seemed easier to trust than memory. Less than 4 hours later, deputies arrived at the Turner home. The pounding on the door woke Caleb. He came into the hallway barefoot, wearing an oversized sleep shirt, and saw Ruth speaking to 2 officers beneath the porch light. Silas stood behind her. He had returned from work not long before and still smelled faintly of brass polish and machine oil. The deputies asked where he had been that evening. Silas explained that he had repaired the large wall clock inside St. Bartholomew's Church Hall. After finishing, he drove to a supplier's storage facility to collect a spring for an anniversary clock. His electronic access card had been scanned at the storage building at 9:07 p.m. The facility was more than 13 miles from Marlowe's Corner Market. Silas believed that record would protect him. But according to the camera, the robbery had happened at 8:18. The investigators assumed Silas could have robbed the store and then driven to the storage facility afterward. The deputies had already seen the footage. The robber was a tall black man with broad shoulders and an uneven step. Silas had injured his right knee years earlier while carrying a grandfather clock down a staircase. He sometimes limped when tired. He owned a dark coat. He had visited Owen's store 2 weeks before and knew where the camera and register were located. None of those details proved he was the robber. Together, they created a story the deputies were ready to believe. Caleb watched one officer place handcuffs around his father's wrists. The memory never left him. The wet shine of the pavement. Ruth repeating Silas's name. A neighbor's curtain moving across the street. the clocks inside their home ticking while the world outside stopped making sense. Silas turned toward Caleb before the patrol car door closed. He did not promise everything would be fine. Silas respected the truth too much to offer comfort he could not guarantee. He only told Caleb to take care of his mother. By morning, Briar Creek had already judged him. News traveled quickly through the town. A poor black clockmaker had robbed an elderly white shopkeeper. The camera had recorded the crime. Silas had known the store's layout. His business had been struggling. For people who wanted a simple answer, the story fit too easily. Customers stopped entering Turner Clockworks. Some claimed they wanted to wait until the facts were clear, though they had already decided which facts mattered. Others crossed the road rather than pass the shop. Someone wrote the word "thief" across the front window in black marker. Ruth tried to remove it before Caleb arrived from school, but the stain remained visible beneath the glass. At school, children repeated the words they heard at home. They asked Caleb whether his father had robbed other stores. One boy placed a plastic toy clock on Caleb's desk and joked that perhaps Silas could steal another hour from it. The teacher heard him. She looked away. That was the first time Caleb understood that silence could become permission. District Attorney Roland Vance took control of the case almost immediately. Vance was preparing to run for a state judgeship. He had built his reputation on swift convictions, polished speeches, and promises to protect honest families from crime. He appeared at church breakfasts, charity events, and press conferences. He knew exactly where to stand when cameras arrived and exactly how long to pause before saying the word justice. The Turner case was perfect for him. An elderly victim, a security video, a struggling defendant, a timeline simple enough for television. Vance told reporters the evidence was strong. He praised the deputies for acting quickly. He described Silas as someone who had used the trust of a local business owner to learn the store's vulnerabilities. Before the trial began, Vance had already turned the case into part of his political story. Silas received a court-appointed attorney named Brian Kell. Kell was not cruel. He was exhausted. His desk carried more files than any one lawyer could read carefully. He moved from hearing to hearing, bargaining cases, filling forms, and telling himself that doing something for each client was better than doing nothing. Silas explained the access card record from 907. He explained the repair at St. Bartholomew's. He explained that Owen claimed to have called 911 immediately, yet the emergency log showed 922. Kell wrote a few notes and promised to investigate. But he made the same mistake everyone else had made. He trusted the timestamp. At trial, Roland Vance repeated the time 8:18 until it became the heartbeat of the prosecution's case. At 8:18, the robber entered the store. At 8:18, Owen Marlowe feared for his life. At 8:18, Silas Turner had no verified alibi. The access card scan at 9:07 seemed irrelevant if the robbery occurred almost 50 minutes earlier. Vance suggested Silas had committed the crime, changed his route, and then appeared at the storage building to create distance from the scene. The 911 call at 9:22 was treated as evidence of Owen's trauma. Vance told the jury that a terrified elderly man could not be expected to remember every minute after being threatened. Perhaps Owen had locked the doors. Perhaps he had sat in shock. Perhaps fear had distorted his sense of time. Vance transformed the contradiction into sympathy. Then he delivered the sentence that stayed in Caleb's mind for years. The camera had no reason to lie. It sounded powerful. Mechanical evidence seemed pure. A camera had no prejudice, no fear, no political ambition, and no desire to protect one man or accuse another. But no one asked whether the camera knew the correct time. Brian Kell did not call a security system expert. He did not inspect the recorder's settings. He did not enlarge the background of the footage. He did not ask about the daylight saving time change. He did not ask why the closed sign appeared turned toward the street. He did not ask why a mop bucket was visible near the counter, or why Owen's bank deposit bag had already been placed beside the register. Most importantly, he did not ask about the red rooster clock. Caleb sat behind his mother throughout the trial. He was 8 years old and did not understand every legal term, but he understood tone. He knew when adults were searching for truth and when they were only waiting for their turn to speak. No one was truly listening to Silas. When Silas testified, he spoke calmly. Some members of the jury seemed to expect innocence to sound louder. They expected rage, dramatic denial, or a fist striking the table. Silas had spent his life working around fragile mechanisms. He chose his words carefully. Vance used that caution against him. He made Silas confirm that his business had financial problems. He made him admit that he had been inside Marlowe's store. He made him admit that he knew where the security camera was mounted. He made him confirm that he owned a dark coat and walked with a limp. Each fact proved little by itself. Together, beneath Vance's confident voice, they became a cage. The jury found Silas guilty. Ruth made a sound Caleb had never heard from her before. It was not a scream. It was quieter and more painful, as if something inside her had torn, and there was not enough air left to release it. Silas Turner was sentenced to 16 years in prison. Outside the courthouse, Roland Vance gave a statement, praising law enforcement, and promising that Briar Creek would remain a town where criminals faced consequences. Cameras flashed while he spoke. That evening, local news described the case as a clean conviction. Caleb would later hate that phrase. Nothing about what followed was clean. Turner Clockworks closed within a month. Ruth tried to keep it alive, but customers never returned. The landlord waited until the legal deadline and changed the locks. Tools, shelves, and unfinished repairs were sold for a fraction of their value. A dealer from another county bought most of the clocks in bulk. Caleb saved only one. It was a small brass travel clock with a cracked glass face. He slipped it beneath his sweater before anyone could attach a price tag. That night, he wound it carefully and placed it beneath his pillow. The ticking was uneven, but it continued. Ruth and Caleb moved into a narrow room behind the laundromat where she worked at night. The walls trembled whenever the large machines entered their spin cycles. The air smelled of detergent, damp clothing, and warm metal. Caleb slept on a small cot beside cardboard boxes. Ruth slept in a folding chair and claimed it was comfortable. Caleb knew she was lying, but it was the kind of lie parents use to protect children from guilt. Every Wednesday, Ruth drove Caleb to visit Silas. The prison was 2 hours away. Caleb hated the metal detector, the locked doors, the plastic chairs, and the guards who spoke to families, as if love were another item that needed inspection. Silas always smiled when they arrived. That smile hurt more than anything. He asked about school. He asked about Ruth's health. He asked whether Caleb had kept the brass clock running. He rarely spoke about the 16-year sentence. Perhaps the number was too large to hold an ordinary conversation. One afternoon, Caleb finally asked why the truth had not saved him. Silas stared through the scratched plastic barrier for a long time. He could have told his son that truth always won in the end. It would have sounded comforting. It would also have been dishonest. Instead, Silas explained that truth did not fail because it was weak. It failed when people stopped looking for it. That sentence followed Caleb home. It remained with him during the long bus ride, through Ruth's exhausted silence, and into the room behind the laundromat. That night, Caleb lay awake with the brass clock ticking beside his pillow. He thought about 8:18. He thought about the access card at 9:07. He thought about the 911 call at 9:22. The numbers were supposed to belong to the same night, but they did not move together. They were like gears from different clocks, forced into the same mechanism. For the first time, Caleb's grief began to change. It did not become hope. Not yet. It became a question. If the law was built from books, records, timestamps, photographs, signatures, and statements, perhaps it was not an invisible monster. Perhaps it was a machine, a massive machine. A machine powerful enough to crush people when the wrong part failed. And every broken machine left a trace. Caleb began going to the Briar Creek Public Library after school. The legal books were stored on a lower shelf near outdated tax manuals. They were heavy, dusty, and filled with words that seemed designed to keep ordinary people outside. Affidavit, transcript, petition, evidentiary hearing, chain of custody, post-conviction relief, procedural default. At first, Caleb understood almost nothing, so he copied the words into a notebook and looked them up one by one. He whispered them beneath his breath until they stopped sounding like locked doors. He searched old newspaper articles. He read court summaries. He learned how to request public records. Ruth tried to stop him. She believed Silas was innocent, but she had already watched the system take her husband, their home, their business, and nearly all her strength. She did not want it to take Caleb's childhood too. She told him some doors were too heavy for a child to open. Caleb asked whether they became lighter when everyone stopped pushing. Ruth had no answer. By the time he turned 9, the library staff recognized him. He came after school, on weekends, and during Ruth's longest shifts. He drew timelines on sheets of paper and taped them together because one page was not large enough to contain everything that felt wrong. He wrote the 3 times repeatedly. 8:18, 9:07, 9:22. That was when Marion Whitaker noticed him. Marion was 73 and had spent 38 years working as a court clerk. She had watched lawyers enter courtrooms full of confidence and leave without understanding the lives they had changed. She knew how cases disappeared beneath paperwork. She knew how a missing signature, an incorrect date, or an unexamined record could become the difference between freedom and prison. Retirement had made her quieter, but it had not made her forget. For several weeks, Marion watched Caleb from across the library. She saw him struggle with court forms too complicated for his age. She watched him feed coins into the photocopier, copying pages from his father's case. One afternoon, she asked what he was working on. Caleb hesitated. Adults often sounded interested just before telling him to stop. He said it was his father's case. When Marion heard the name Silas Turner, her expression shifted. She remembered the trial. She remembered how quickly it had moved. She remembered Roland Vance discussing the conviction at political events. She remembered courthouse employees whispering that Brian Kell had seemed unprepared. Most of all, she remembered thinking that the timeline felt too neat. Marion asked to see Caleb's notes. She read for almost an hour without speaking. Caleb expected her to tell him he misunderstood the law. Instead, she paused at the 911 log, then at the access record, then at the camera timestamp. Finally, Marion told him that if he wanted to understand a broken case, he would need the whole record, not only the pieces adults had allowed him to see. That was how Caleb found his first ally. Marion did not promise to free Silas. She knew too much about the system to offer easy hope. She helped Ruth file requests for transcripts and evidence. She explained legal terms Caleb had misunderstood. She showed him which documents mattered and which only looked important. Most importantly, she did not take the investigation away from him. She guided him, but she allowed him to keep searching. Together, they rebuilt the night of March 10th. The camera said 8:18. Silas's access card said 9:07. The 911 record said 9:22. Owen's first statement said he called police immediately after the robber left. If Owen was telling the truth, the robbery could not have happened at 8:18. Marion requested the original still photographs from the security footage. Weeks later, they arrived in a worn brown envelope. Caleb spread them across a library table. At first, he made the same mistake everyone else had made. He studied the robber. The dark coat, the broad shoulders, the lowered head, the uneven walk. The image was too unclear to identify anyone, yet close enough to Silas's shape to explain why frightened people had stopped looking. Marion watched Caleb struggle with the resemblance. Then she asked what his father would examine if the photograph were a broken clock. Caleb looked up. Marion reminded him that a clockmaker did not stare only at the hand that had stopped. He studied the entire mechanism. So Caleb stopped looking at the robber. He looked at the counter, the coffee machine, the rack of snacks, the mop bucket near the aisle, the bank deposit bag beneath Owen's arm. The sign on the front door turned to show closed. Then Caleb saw the red rooster clock. It hung behind the register, partly hidden beneath glare. The black hands were thin against the pale face, but Caleb had spent years learning to read clocks from difficult angles. The timestamp in the corner of the security image read 8:18 p.m. The red rooster clock showed approximately 9:18. Caleb leaned closer. He checked the next image. The same difference. He checked another. Still 1 hour. His father had repaired that clock 2 weeks before the robbery. Silas had checked its movement and ensured it kept accurate time. Caleb looked at Marion, afraid to trust what he was seeing. Marion reached for a calendar. March 10th was the first day after daylight saving time began. Owen had moved the hands of the wall clock forward by 1 hour, but the old security recorder had not updated automatically. The camera timestamp was 1 hour slow. The robbery had not happened at 8:18. It had happened at 9:18. Suddenly, every piece moved into place. Owen's 911 call at 9:22 came 4 minutes after the robbery, exactly as his first statement claimed. Silas's access card showed him entering a storage facility 13 miles away at 9:07. He could not have reached Marlowe's Corner Market 11 minutes later. For 2 years, Silas Turner had been imprisoned because everyone trusted a camera without checking its clock. The truth had not been missing. It had been ticking in the background of the evidence from the beginning. But finding the truth and proving it in court were not the same thing. Marion knew Roland Vance would fight them. His reputation, his campaign, and perhaps several other convictions depended on keeping the Turner case closed. They would need the security system manual, dispatch records, access logs, maintenance documents, and Owen Marlowe's testimony. They would need to make frightened adults admit that a child had seen what they had ignored. And before Caleb could ask his one question in court, Roland Vance would use every part of his power to make sure the truth never reached the witness stand. Roland Vance learned about the new evidence before the hearing date was announced. By then, Marion had helped Ruth submit the security photographs, the access card record, the emergency dispatch log, and the manual for the old camera system. The documents were enough to force the court to take a second look, but not enough to guarantee justice. Marion knew that courts did not reopen convictions simply because the truth seemed obvious to a family. The truth had to survive procedure, opposition, and the pride of everyone whose reputation depended on the original verdict remaining untouched. Vance understood the danger immediately. If the robbery had taken place at 9:18 rather than 8:18, Silas's conviction did not merely become questionable, it became impossible to defend. The access log placed him more than 13 miles away, 11 minutes before the crime. Owen's emergency call supported the corrected time. The Red Rooster clock supported it. Even the store's closing routine supported it. But Silas was not the only thing Vance could lose. The Turner conviction had appeared in his campaign speeches. He had praised it as proof that his office trusted evidence over excuses. He had used the case to present himself as a prosecutor who moved quickly, protected elderly victims, and refused to be manipulated by emotional defenses. If a 10-year-old boy proved that his office had ignored the most basic question in the case, voters would not see a minor technical error. They would see arrogance. And once people began questioning one conviction, they might begin questioning others. Vance could not allow that. He did not threaten Ruth directly. That would have been too crude and too easy to expose. Instead, a local reporter received an anonymous suggestion that the Turner family was using Caleb's age to create public sympathy. An article appeared describing the new evidence as an emotional theory developed by a grieving child and a retired clerk with no authority to retry the case. The article did not call Caleb foolish. It did something more effective. It made him sound harmless. At school, the whispers returned. Some children said Caleb was pretending to be a lawyer. Others said his mother wanted money from the county. One teacher advised him privately that he should focus on school and leave legal matters to adults. Caleb listened without arguing. Adults had handled the legal matters before. His father was still in prison. Ruth found the article folded beneath their door one morning. Someone had circled the phrase emotional theory in red ink. She tore the page in half, then into smaller pieces, but Caleb had already seen it. He told her it did not matter. Ruth looked at him and recognized the same careful expression Silas used when hiding pain. She wanted to tell Caleb he did not have to be brave all the time. She wanted to take the files away, close the notebooks, and protect what remained of his childhood. But the hearing was now their only path forward, and turning back would not restore anything already lost. So Ruth did what she had done for 2 years. She kept moving. Marion focused on the evidence. She found an archived copy of the camera recorder's operating manual, which confirmed that the system did not automatically adjust for daylight saving time. The clock had to be changed manually through a sequence of menus Owen Marlowe had never learned to use. They obtained a certified copy of Silas's access card scan at 9:07:43 p.m. They confirmed the storage facility was 13.4 miles from Marlowe's Corner Market. Even under ideal conditions, the drive took more than 17 minutes. They also found a service receipt from St. Bartholomew's Church Hall. Silas had signed it at 8:46 p.m. after adjusting the church's large wall clock for the time change. A church custodian remembered seeing him leave. Each piece strengthened the corrected timeline. But the most important witness remained Owen Marlowe. Without Owen confirming his closing routine and the accuracy of the red rooster clock, Vance could argue that the wall clock had been wrong, that the photograph was unclear, or that the time difference was only speculation. Marion went to see him. Marlowe's corner. Market looked older than Caleb remembered. The soda sign still flickered. One gas pump had been covered with a plastic sheet. The bell above the entrance rang too late, sounding only after Marion had stepped fully inside. Owen stood behind the counter with both hands resting on the edge. The red rooster clock still hung behind him. It was ticking. Marion introduced herself and explained why she had come. Owen did not ask her to sit. He did not offer coffee. He kept wiping the same section of counter with a cloth that was already dry. At first, he repeated what he had said during the original investigation. The robber had been tall. The man had moved like Silas. He had known the store. The camera showed the time. Marion asked whether he had adjusted the wall clock on the morning of March 10th. Owen's hand stopped moving, only for a second. Then he said he did not remember. Marion asked whether the security recorder had been adjusted. Owen said he did not know. She asked what time he usually closed on Sundays. 9 o'clock, he answered automatically. Then he realized what he had said. His eyes moved toward the rooster clock. Marion saw fear settle over him before he lowered his gaze. A few days earlier, someone from Vance's office had visited the store. The assistant had spoken politely, almost kindly. He reminded Owen that changing his testimony could cause serious problems. People might accuse him of helping convict an innocent man. Silas's family might sue him. Insurance investigators might reopen the robbery claim. Customers might stop trusting him. No one told Owen to lie. They only explained how painful the truth could become. Fear completed the rest. Owen told Marion that 2 years was a long time. He said his memory was unreliable. He said maybe he had flipped the closed sign early that night. Maybe he had prepared the deposit before 9. Maybe the rooster clock had been wrong despite Silas's repair. Marion knew those possibilities had not come from memory. They had been given to him as hiding places. She did not accuse him. She only said that Silas had already paid for Owen's fear with 2 years of his life. Owen looked away. When Marion returned to the laundromat, Caleb knew from her expression that the meeting had gone badly. She spread her notes across the small table. They had the technical evidence, but Owen planned to say he could not remember. Vance would use that uncertainty to attack everything else. He would argue that the wall clock might have been inaccurate, that the store routine could vary, and that the defense was forcing meaning into an unclear photograph. Marion began preparing questions. She wrote them carefully, one after another. Had Owen personally changed the security recorder after daylight saving time? Did he know whether the system updated automatically? Had the red rooster clock been keeping accurate time? Did he call 911 immediately after the robber left? Was the close sign turned before or after the last customer departed? Did he prepare the bank deposit before or after closing? The list grew longer. Caleb copied the questions and studied them every night. He understood why Marion had written each one. The questions were precise. They were logical. They covered every important detail. But something felt wrong. Whenever Caleb imagined Owen on the witness stand, he saw the old man retreating behind the same answer. I do not remember. A technical question gave him somewhere to hide. A question about the camera allowed him to blame the machine. A question about daylight saving time allowed him to claim confusion. A question about the exact minute allowed Vance to argue that trauma had damaged his memory. Caleb did not need Owen to explain the technology. He needed him to remember his own life. The night before the hearing, Caleb sat on the floor of the room behind the laundromat. Ruth had fallen asleep in the folding chair, with her shoes still on. The building had gone quiet, except for one dryer, turning slowly in the next room. The security photographs lay around Caleb. He studied the image again. The robber stood near the counter. Owen was behind the register. The closed sign had been turned. The mop bucket was near the aisle. The bank deposit bag rested beneath Owen's arm. The red rooster clock showed 9:18. Caleb thought about the way his father repaired clocks. When an entire mechanism seemed wrong, Silas never touched every gear at once. He searched for the single part that explained all the others. Caleb picked up Marion's list of questions. He crossed out the first one, then the second, then another. He continued until nearly every line disappeared beneath his pencil. When Marion arrived the next morning, Caleb handed her the page. Only one idea remained. Marion read it twice. The question did not mention the camera. It did not mention the time change. It did not accuse Owen of lying. It did not sound like a lawyer's question at all. That was precisely why it might work. The courthouse was already crowded when they arrived. News of the hearing had spread through Briar Creek. Reporters filled the hallway. Some people had come because they believed Silas was innocent. Others came because they wanted to see whether a child's theory would collapse under real scrutiny. Roland Vance stood near the courtroom doors, speaking with two assistants. His suit was dark, his tie perfectly centered, his expression calm. When he saw Caleb, he gave the boy a brief smile. It was not kindness. It was the smile of a man reminding an opponent that the room belonged to him. Silas was brought into court wearing a plain shirt Ruth had sent through his attorney. Prison had changed him. He was thinner. Gray had begun to appear in his beard. His shoulders curved slightly forward, as though 2 years of being watched had taught him to occupy less space. Caleb wanted to run to him. The rules did not allow it. So father and son looked at one another across the room. Silas glanced at the papers in Caleb's hands. Then he gave the smallest nod. It was the same nod he used to give at the workbench when Caleb had finally placed a delicate gear in the correct position. Judge Helena Cross entered, and the courtroom rose. She was known for strict procedure and little patience for courtroom drama. That worried Ruth. It reassured Marion. A judge who disliked drama might be more willing to listen to evidence that did not depend on it. The hearing began with Marion presenting the newly discovered material through the attorney assisting the family. The access record was entered. The 911 log was entered. The service receipt from St. Bartholomew's was entered. The security system manual was entered. Vance challenged every piece. He argued that an access scan proved only that Silas's card had been used, not necessarily that Silas himself had used it. He suggested another person could have carried the card, even though no evidence supported that theory. He said the church receipt did not establish where Silas went afterward. He said the 911 call showed only when Owen contacted police, not when the robbery occurred. He called the wall clock interpretation unreliable because the security image was grainy and taken from an angle. Each argument was weak alone, but Vance delivered them with the confidence of a man who knew certainty could make speculation sound reasonable. Then Owen Marlowe was called to the witness stand. The old man walked slowly. He held his hat in both hands until the clerk told him to set it aside. When he took the oath, his voice trembled. At first, the questions were simple. He confirmed that he owned Marlowe's Corner Market. He confirmed that Silas had repaired the Red Rooster clock 2 weeks before the robbery. He confirmed the store normally closed at 9 on Sunday nights. Then Marion's side asked whether he had changed the wall clock for daylight saving time. Owen looked toward Vance. It was a quick glance. Judge Cross saw it. So did Caleb. Owen said he could not remember. He was asked whether he had changed the security recorder. He said he did not know how. He was asked whether the wall clock had been keeping accurate time. He said he believed so, but could not be certain. The questions moved closer to the central issue, and Owen's answers became less useful. He could not remember. It had been too long. The robbery had frightened him. He might have prepared the deposit early. He might have flipped the closed sign before 9. He might have waited before calling 911. Vance sat at the prosecution table with his hands folded. He did not need Owen to defend the original timeline. He only needed him to make the truth sound uncertain. When Vance questioned him, his tone became gentle. He reminded Owen that the night had been traumatic. He asked whether fear could affect memory. Owen agreed. He asked whether Owen had ever personally inspected the internal settings of the security recorder. Owen said no. He asked whether Owen could swear that the rooster clock had been perfectly accurate that evening. Owen hesitated. Then he said no. Vance thanked him and sat down. The faintest satisfaction crossed his face. The defense had found a discrepancy, but he believed he had contained it. A frightened witness, an old clock, and a technical manual were not enough to overturn a jury's verdict if he could keep doubt scattered across the room. Judge Cross reviewed her notes. She asked whether either side had additional evidence. Marion looked at Caleb. This was the moment they had discussed, but now that it had arrived, it felt impossible. Caleb's mouth had gone dry. The courtroom seemed larger than before. The distance between his chair and the witness stand felt longer than the distance from Briar Creek to the prison. Ruth placed a hand over his. She did not tell him he had to do it. That helped him stand. The movement was small, but the courtroom noticed. Caleb rose beside the defense table. Roland Vance turned. Caleb asked the judge for permission to put one question to Owen Marlowe. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Vance was on his feet immediately. He objected that Caleb was a child, not counsel. He said allowing the boy to participate would turn a serious legal proceeding into emotional theater. He warned that grief was not evidence, and sympathy could not replace procedure. He spoke as though he were protecting the dignity of the court. But Caleb watched his jaw tighten. The prosecutor was afraid. Judge Cross called for silence. She looked at Marion, then at the attorney assisting the Turners, then at Caleb. She asked whether the proposed question had been reviewed. Marion confirmed that it had. She explained that Caleb's question concerned the witness's established business routine and would not require legal argument. Vance objected again. Judge Cross stopped him. She said the purpose of the hearing was to determine whether a man had been imprisoned under a materially false timeline. If a relevant question had been overlooked because the person who thought of it happened to be 10 years old, the court would not protect its pride by refusing to hear it. She allowed Caleb one line of inquiry. No speech. No argument. Only the question. Caleb stepped toward the witness stand. The microphone stood above his mouth. A deputy retrieved a small wooden platform from beside the clerk's desk and placed it beneath his feet. The sight of the boy standing on that box changed something in the room. For 2 years, adults with badges, titles, degrees, and authority had controlled Silas Turner's fate. Now his son needed a wooden step simply to be tall enough for them to hear him. Caleb looked at Owen. The old man could not hold his gaze. Caleb did not ask about the timestamp. He did not ask about the camera manual. He did not ask whether the rooster clock had been accurate. Instead, he asked what time Marlowe's Corner Market normally closed on Sunday nights. Owen blinked. The question was so ordinary that his prepared fear had nowhere to go. He answered automatically. 9 o'clock. Caleb asked whether Owen usually counted the register before closing or after closing. Vance rose. He objected that Caleb had been allowed one question, not a cross-examination. Judge Cross looked at Marion. Marion explained that the question was part of the same line of inquiry concerning store closing routine. The judge allowed Caleb to continue, but warned him to remain focused. Caleb asked again. Owen said he counted the register after closing. Caleb asked whether he turned the sign on the front door to closed before beginning the count. Owen's fingers tightened around the edge of the witness chair. He said yes. Caleb looked at the enlarged security photograph displayed beside the judge. His voice trembled, but he did not stop. He asked why, if the robbery had happened at 8:18, the photograph showed the closed sign already turned, the mop bucket pulled out, the bank deposit bag placed beside the register, and Owen performing the tasks he had just admitted he only did after the store closed at 9. No one moved. The question was not loud. It carried no accusation. That made it more powerful. Caleb was not asking Owen to understand machinery. He was asking him to remember the ordinary rhythm of his own life. Owen turned toward the image. For 2 years, everyone had directed his attention toward the robber. The coat, the shoulders, the height, the uneven walk. He had stared at the figure so often that the rest of the image had become invisible. Now he saw the store. He saw the sign. He saw the deposit bag. He saw the mop. He saw himself standing behind the counter in the familiar posture he used every Sunday after locking the door. Something changed in his face. Vance saw it and stood again. He argued that the question was misleading. He said routines could change. He said Owen might have closed early. He said the defense was manipulating an elderly witness through emotional details. His words came faster now. Too fast. Owen raised one hand. The gesture was weak, but it stopped the prosecutor. He said he remembered the mop. His voice was barely above a whisper. The courtroom leaned closer. Owen remembered pulling it from the storage area because the floor near the drink cooler had been sticky. He remembered the handle falling against the freezer after the robber left, making a hollow sound that startled him. He remembered turning the sign to closed. He remembered preparing the bank deposit. He remembered looking at the rooster clock because his wife had once trained him never to leave cash in the store after 9. Then he looked more closely at the clock in the photograph. The color left his face. Owen said Silas had repaired that clock. He said it had been keeping accurate time. He said he had moved the hands forward on the morning of March 10th because of daylight saving time. He remembered complaining about losing an hour. He remembered checking the rooster clock several times during the day because he did not trust himself to have adjusted it correctly. Judge Cross asked him directly whether the robbery had occurred before or after the store's normal closing time. Owen began to cry. After, he said. The word fell into the courtroom like a stone into still water. The robbery happened after 9. Marion stood and requested permission to display the enlarged photograph beside the certified records. The judge allowed it. The timestamp in the corner read 8:18 p.m. The rooster clock showed approximately 9:18. The emergency call was received at 9:22. Silas's access card had been scanned 13 miles away at 9:07:43. The church receipt placed him at St. Bartholomew's until 8:46. The camera manual confirmed that the recorder did not automatically update for daylight saving time. What had once seemed like disconnected details now aligned with painful precision. The camera was 1 hour slow. The robbery happened at 9:18. Silas Turner could not have been there. For 2 years, the prosecution had treated the camera timestamp as the strongest evidence in the case. It had been the weakest clock in the entire story. Owen lowered his head and apologized. At first, no one knew whether he was speaking to Silas, Caleb, Ruth, or the judge. Then he turned toward the defense table. He told Silas he was sorry. He said fear had convinced him that uncertainty was safer than truth. He admitted Vance's office had warned him about lawsuits, insurance problems, and public blame if his memory changed. No one had ordered him to lie. They had only made honesty feel dangerous. Silas did not answer. His face remained still, but tears filled his eyes. The truth he had repeated for 2 years was finally being spoken by someone the court had always considered worthy of belief. Roland Vance attempted to recover. He argued that Owen's renewed memory had been influenced by Caleb's questions. He said the wall clock could still have been inaccurate. He insisted that the court should not overturn a jury verdict based on an emotional reconstruction of store routine. Judge Cross asked whether his office had verified the security recorder's time settings before the original trial. Vance said the footage had been authenticated. The judge repeated the question. Had anyone verified the clock? Vance began explaining that the timestamp had been accepted by investigators. Judge Cross interrupted. She asked whether his office had compared the 8:18 timestamp with the 9:22 emergency call. Vance said trauma could explain a delayed report. She asked whether his office had investigated the access card scan at 9:07. He said the scan did not prove Silas personally used the card. Judge Cross asked whether the prosecution had presented any evidence that someone else possessed it. Vance had no answer. She asked whether the defense had received enlarged stills, clearly showing the rooster clock. Vance said the photographs had been available in the evidence file. The words harmed him more than he realized. Available. The truth had been available. The wall clock had been visible. The 911 record had existed. The access scan had existed. The daylight saving time change had been public knowledge. None of it had been hidden. It had simply been treated as less important than the story Vance wanted the jury to believe. Judge Cross recessed the hearing. The courtroom erupted the moment she left. Reporters rushed into the hallway. People spoke over one another. Deputies tried to keep the aisles clear. Ruth remained seated, one hand pressed over her mouth. Marion gathered the papers carefully, though her fingers shook. Caleb stepped down from the wooden platform. The adrenaline left him so quickly that his knees nearly failed. Then Silas called his name. Caleb turned. For the first time in 2 years, there was no glass between them. A deputy allowed Silas to move closer while the court remained in recess. Father and son stood only a few feet apart, both uncertain what the rules permitted. Silas reached out his hand. Caleb took it. The hand felt thinner than he remembered, but it was warm. Silas looked at his son with pride, gratitude, and pain so deep that no single expression could hold all of it. He did not say Caleb had saved him. That would have placed too much weight on a child already carrying more than he should. He only said Caleb had listened. Caleb understood. His father had taught him that every broken thing left a trace. Caleb had simply refused to stop searching for it. When Judge Cross returned, The courtroom rose again. Her expression was controlled, but her voice carried a different weight. She reviewed the evidence slowly. The original prosecution had relied on a robbery time of 8:18 p.m. That time came solely from an unverified security camera timestamp. The recorder had not been adjusted after daylight saving time. The store's wall clock showed approximately 9:18. The witness's established closing routine supported a post-9 o'clock robbery. The emergency call at 9:22 supported that timeline. The access card record placed Silas Turner more than 13 miles away at 9:07. The discrepancy was not minor. It destroyed the prosecution's timeline. Judge Cross said the original jury had never been given the opportunity to consider the corrected time. The defense attorney had failed to investigate material evidence. The prosecution had presented the camera timestamp as objective truth without confirming its accuracy. Then she looked directly at Silas. She said the conviction could not stand. Ruth folded forward as if the strength holding her upright for 2 years had suddenly been removed. Marion caught her before she slipped from the bench. Caleb stared at the judge. He heard the words, but his mind could not immediately make them real. The conviction was vacated. Silas Turner was to be released from custody, while the state determined whether any lawful prosecution could continue without the false timeline. Judge Cross added that given the corrected evidence and the absence of reliable identification, the court saw no legitimate basis for holding him further. For 2 years, Silas had measured his life by prison bells, meal schedules, locked doors, visiting hours, and lights-out commands. Now a judge told him he could go home. Silas closed his eyes. A tear moved down his face. The courtroom began to react, but Judge Cross raised her hand. She was not finished. She said the hearing had revealed failures too serious to be treated as an isolated mistake. The prosecution had relied on technical evidence without verifying it. Contradictory records had been dismissed. A poor defendant's alibi had been treated as an inconvenience rather than a constitutional obligation. She ordered that the Attorney General's office receive the full record of the case. She also requested an independent review of other convictions prosecuted by Roland Vance, in which disputed surveillance timestamps had served as central evidence. The color drained from Vance's face. There was the consequence he had not prepared for. For years, he had built his reputation on clean timelines, decisive prosecutions, and cameras he claimed could not lie. Now those same timelines would be reopened. The evidence he had used to close doors would be used to open files. His career would not be destroyed by a political rival. It would be destroyed by the question he had been too arrogant to ask. The courtroom adjourned. Outside, reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed as Silas emerged beside Ruth, Caleb, and Marion. The late afternoon sky stretched above them without bars, concrete, or razor wire. Silas stopped walking. He looked upward. Caleb watched his father study the open sky, as if it were another kind of clock, too wide to measure and too beautiful to trust immediately. Reporters shouted questions. Did he forgive the prosecutor? Would he sue the county? How did it feel to be free? Was Caleb a genius? Silas did not answer at first. Then he said, the truth had been there from the beginning. His family should never have needed a child to find what trained adults had refused to examine. It was not the triumphant statement the reporters expected. It was more powerful than triumph. It was an indictment. That evening, Silas did not return to the home he remembered. The old house was gone. Turner Clockworks was gone. The workbench, the shelves, the clocks, and the faded sign had been sold or scattered. Freedom returned him to a world that had continued moving without him. He went instead to the narrow room behind the laundromat. Ruth opened the door. For a moment, Silas stood among the boxes, the folding chair, Caleb's small cot, and the machines vibrating through the wall. No one knew what to say. Caleb had imagined his father's return 1,000 times. He had imagined laughter, celebration, and the instant restoration of everything the conviction had taken. But justice did not rewind time. It only stopped the lie from taking more. Silas placed his small bag of prison belongings on the floor. Then he noticed the brass travel clock with the cracked face sitting beside Caleb's bed. Caleb had kept it running. Silas picked it up carefully and held it near his ear. The ticking was uneven. Still alive. He looked at Caleb and smiled. It was the first smile his son had seen that didn't have prison glass behind it. but freedom would not erase what had happened. Roland Vance's downfall was only beginning. Owen Marlowe still had to face the cost of his fear. Ruth still carried 2 years of exhaustion inside her. Silas had returned home, but part of him remained trapped in schedules, locked doors, and memories no judge could vacate. And Caleb, now praised by the same town that had once mocked him, would soon learn that being proven right did not automatically make the world kind. The case had ended. The healing had not. Freedom did not arrive like the ending of a story. That was the first thing Caleb learned after Silas Turner walked out of the courthouse and the people of Briar Creek began calling him innocent. For 2 years, the town had treated Silas as though a prison sentence could define the whole of a man. Then, in a single afternoon, the same town tried to reverse itself with headlines, handshakes, apologies, and expressions of shock. But a changed headline could not return a stolen year. It could not rebuild Turner Clockworks. It could not erase the nights Ruth had slept in a folding chair behind the laundromat. It could not give Caleb back the part of his childhood spent studying court transcripts beneath buzzing library lights. And it could not teach Silas how to feel free simply because a judge had opened a door. On his first night home, Silas barely slept. Caleb woke before dawn and saw his father sitting at the small table beside the brass travel clock. The room was dark, except for the weak light coming through the laundromat window. Outside, one of the machines had entered its final spin cycle, making the wall tremble gently. Silas held the clock near his ear. He wound it, listened, adjusted the crown, and listened again. The clock did not need that much attention. Caleb knew it. Silas knew it too. But after 2 years of guards, searches, count times, locked doors, and hands that were never allowed to move without permission, his fingers needed something delicate to trust him again. Caleb remained near the doorway. He wanted to say something comforting. He wanted to tell his father the nightmare was over. But Silas had taught him not to make claims that time had not proven. The nightmare had changed. That was not the same as ending. Silas noticed him and placed the clock on the table. He apologized for waking him. Caleb said the machines had done that. They both knew it was not true. For several minutes, father and son sat in silence. Then Silas asked whether Caleb had wound the clock every day. Caleb admitted that he had sometimes wound it twice because he was afraid it would stop. Silas examined the cracked glass face and smiled faintly. He said a clock did not need to look untouched in order to keep going. Sometimes the crack became part of the way a person remembered what it had survived. Caleb understood that his father was not only talking about the clock. Ruth understood too. She had spent 2 years surviving through movement. Motel rooms in the morning, laundry in the evening, prison visits on Wednesdays, bills sorted at night. She had lived so long without permission to collapse that when Silas returned, her body did not know how to rest. She continued waking before her alarm. She continued saving food as if the next meal were uncertain. Whenever an unfamiliar number appeared on her phone, fear moved through her before reason could catch it. At the grocery store, she checked prices twice and then checked them again. Silas once told her she did not have to work both jobs anymore. Ruth looked at him as though he had suggested she step from a moving train. She had learned not to trust stability. A conviction could take a husband. A landlord could take a shop. A town could take a reputation. A single mistake could take everything while insisting it was following procedure. Ruth loved that Silas had come home, but love did not automatically make her feel safe. Some nights, they sat beside one another without speaking. They did not need to explain the distance. It had been built from prison walls, collect calls, financial fear, and 2 years of learning how to live separately while still believing they belonged together. They began repairing that distance in small ways. Silas walked Ruth to the motel before sunrise. Ruth brought him coffee while he sorted through the few tools that remained. They ate dinner together even when no one had much appetite. Sometimes they spoke about what had happened. Sometimes they chose not to. Caleb watched them and learned that healing rarely arrived through one powerful conversation. More often, it came through ordinary acts repeated until the body began to believe the danger had passed. The town had its own way of reacting. Some people came to apologize. The first was an elderly woman whose mantel clock Silas had repaired years earlier. She arrived at the laundromat holding a pie and crying before Ruth opened the door. She admitted she had believed the news reports. She admitted she had stopped visiting the shop because she had been afraid of what neighbors might say. She did not ask Silas to tell her everything was fine. She simply said she had failed him. Silas accepted the pie. He did not immediately accept the apology. The woman seemed to understand. Others came with longer explanations. They said the evidence had looked convincing. They said everyone had trusted Roland Vance. They said no ordinary person could have known the camera was wrong. What they wanted was not forgiveness. They wanted relief from the discomfort of knowing they had chosen the easiest story. Ruth had little patience for those apologies. She listened when she felt able. When she did not, she closed the door. Silas never criticized her for it. He understood that forgiveness offered under pressure was only another form of surrender. At school, Caleb's world changed almost overnight. The same principal who had once advised him not to bring attention to his father's case called him into the office and said the entire school was proud. A teacher suggested holding an assembly in his honor. Children who had mocked him now wanted to sit beside him at lunch. One boy asked whether Caleb remembered him. Caleb remembered him perfectly. He remembered the toy clock placed on his desk. He remembered the joke about his father stealing time. He remembered the teacher looking away. The boy apologized. Not well. He said he had only repeated what other people were saying. Caleb looked at him and realized most cruelty traveled that way. It passed from one frightened or careless person to another, until no one felt responsible for carrying it. Caleb did not say they were friends again. He said they could start by being honest. That answer spread through the school before lunch. Some students began calling him the courtroom boy. Others called him the clock boy. Reporters called him a legal prodigy. A television producer called Ruth and offered to fly the family to New York for an interview. Another wanted to build an entire program around Caleb's question. Ruth refused most of them. The first time she agreed to a local interview, she regretted it almost immediately. The reporter repeatedly asked Caleb how it felt to be a hero. Caleb tried to explain that he had not wanted to become a hero. He had wanted his father to come home. The reporter asked whether Caleb planned to become a lawyer. Caleb said he was 10. The moment never appeared in the broadcast. Instead, the program used a dramatic photograph of him standing on the wooden platform beneath the courtroom microphone. The caption called him the boy who defeated a prosecutor. Silas switched off the television. He told Caleb that people liked stories with one hero and one villain because complicated truth made them uncomfortable. But no child should have needed to defeat anyone. The adults should have done their jobs before Caleb ever opened the first law book. Caleb asked whether he should stop speaking about the case. Silas said no. He should speak when the truth might help someone. But he should never let strangers convince him that his pain belonged to them. The formal dismissal of the charges came 3 weeks after the hearing. The document arrived in a thin white envelope. Ruth held it for nearly an hour before opening it. She had imagined that moment during sleepless nights, but the real paper seemed too light for what it carried. It contained several paragraphs of legal language and a few lines stating that the state would not continue prosecution. Case dismissed. Conviction vacated. No further basis for detention. Ruth read the words twice. Then she began laughing. The sound startled Caleb. It was not joy exactly. It was the sound of a body releasing pressure through whatever opening remained. Silas placed his hand on the document. For 2 years, the state had used paper to define him as guilty. Now another piece of paper admitted that the first one should never have existed. He did not smile. He asked Ruth to place the dismissal beside the cracked brass clock. The two objects remained together on the small table for weeks. Proof that the law had corrected itself. Proof that correction had come too late. While the Turner family tried to rebuild, Roland Vance tried to control the damage. He released a public statement claiming he respected the court's decision and remained committed to the integrity of the justice system. He described the incorrect timestamp as an unusual technical problem that could not reasonably have been anticipated during the original prosecution. He did not mention the 911 call. He did not mention the access card record. He did not mention the photograph that had been available from the beginning. And he did not mention the pressure placed on Owen Marlowe before the hearing. For a few days, the explanation worked. Vance still had supporters. Some insisted that one mistake should not destroy a career. Others said he had acted in good faith. His campaign team attempted to move forward, quietly removing references to the Turner conviction from speeches and promotional material. Then the Independent Review found another case. 6 years earlier, a warehouse worker named Thomas Reed had been accused of helping burglarize an electronics store. Surveillance footage appeared to place a vehicle similar to his near the building shortly after midnight. Reed claimed he had been inside a distribution center at the time, but the prosecution argued that another employee could have used his identification badge. The camera timestamp had never been independently verified. Reed had accepted a plea bargain after his public defender warned that juries trusted video more than testimony. He had served 3 years. A review of the recording system showed that its internal clock was 27 minutes fast. The corrected timeline supported Reed's workplace alibi. His conviction was reopened. Then came another case. A young mother had been convicted of participating in a pharmacy theft, based partly on video from a neighboring parking lot. She had insisted she was collecting her child from an emergency clinic across town. Clinic records appeared to conflict with the timestamp, but Vance's office dismissed them as potentially inaccurate. The camera had changed time zones after a software reset. Another case involved a gas station robbery and a recorder that had lost power several days before the crime. When it restarted, its clock reverted to a default time. Investigators never checked. Not every reviewed conviction collapsed. Some remained supported by fingerprints, witness identification, or confessions. But enough cases showed the same habit. Vance's office treated technical evidence as absolute when it helped the prosecution. When conflicting records supported a defendant, they were labeled confusion, coincidence, or manipulation. The problem was no longer one broken camera. It was a philosophy. Roland Vance had not always needed to invent facts. He had simply decided which facts deserved authority. The newspapers that once praised his decisiveness began printing detailed timelines of his cases. Donors stopped returning calls. Political allies who had attended his fundraisers appeared on television, discussing the importance of accountability. His campaign for state judge collapsed within 2 months. The state bar opened an inquiry. The attorney general requested internal emails and case files. Former employees began speaking anonymously about pressure to preserve conviction rates. One assistant admitted that prosecutors were rewarded for closing cases quickly and discouraged from exploring alternative timelines once an arrest had been made. Vance resigned before the investigation ended. In his resignation statement, he claimed he did not want his personal situation to distract from the work of justice. Marion read the sentence aloud while sitting at Ruth's small table. She laughed until her eyes watered. Silas did not laugh. He said powerful men often called the truth a distraction when it finally entered the room without permission. The Turner case became known across the state. But Silas wanted less attention, not more. He struggled to enter crowded places. He disliked people standing behind him. He ate quickly, then apologized when he noticed Ruth watching. He woke before sunrise and sometimes folded his blankets with prison precision before remembering no one would inspect them. He visited the old Turner Clockwork storefront only once. Caleb found him standing across the street. The faded blue door had been painted gray. The window now displayed advertisements for tax preparation and payday loans. Nothing remained of the clocks, the workbench, or the quiet afternoons Caleb had spent sorting brass screws beside his father. Silas stared for a long time. Caleb asked whether he wanted the shop back. Silas shook his head. He said the strange thing about losing a place was that the walls continued standing as though they had not witnessed anything. A man could lose years, customers, reputation, and sleep, while the bricks remained available for someone else's sign. Caleb asked whether they would ever open another shop. Silas did not answer immediately. He looked toward the public library at the end of the street. Then he said perhaps, "Not there." Some rooms held the wrong silence. The new shop began as an idea Marion refused to let disappear. She found a narrow vacant property beside the Briar Creek Public Library. It had once been a used bookstore. The ceiling leaked near the back, one window would not open, and the floorboards carried years of dust. But morning light filled the front room. The location felt right. On one side stood the library where Caleb had learned to read the law. On the other would stand the place where Silas repaired time. The family did not yet have enough money. A civil suit against the county would take years. Donations had arrived after the hearing, but Ruth distrusted sudden generosity. Some people who contributed had not offered a single meal during the 2 years Silas was imprisoned. Silas told her help did not become useless, simply because guilt had brought it. They could accept the wood, paint, tools, and shelves without pretending every motive was pure. A legal foundation created a small recovery grant. St. Bartholomew's Church organized a fundraiser. The church custodian who had seen Silas on the night of the robbery donated several old workbenches. A retired carpenter repaired the floor. Marion arrived carrying boxes of broken courthouse clocks and announced that no new repair shop should open without enough unfinished work to create immediate regret. They cleaned the space together. Ruth scrubbed the windows. Caleb sorted donated tools. Silas repaired shelves, then repaired them again because he did not trust the first attempt. Some volunteers worked quietly. Others apologized while holding paintbrushes. Ruth allowed them to speak. She did not promise absolution. Above the entrance, Silas painted the new name by hand. Turner & Son Clockworks. Caleb stared at the sign for so long that Silas asked whether the spelling was wrong. Caleb said his name did not belong there. His father was the real clockmaker. Silas looked genuinely offended. He told Caleb that without him, there would be no shop and no clockmaker to reopen it. Caleb had kept the work alive when every adult around him had declared it finished. Below the shop name, Caleb painted a smaller sentence. "We restore what time almost took away." Silas complained that it sounded too poetic for a repair shop. Ruth cried when she saw it. Then Silas stopped complaining. Before the shop opened, Owen Marlowe came to see them. He did not arrive with reporters. He did not come during the fundraiser or stand where others could watch him apologize. He went to the laundromat on a quiet afternoon, carrying a cardboard box. Ruth saw him through the glass door and became still. For 2 years, Owen had been presented as the innocent victim and Silas as the dangerous man who had harmed him. Now Owen stood outside looking smaller than the box in his hands. Ruth considered refusing to let him enter. Silas told her it was her choice. That mattered. For so long, other people had controlled what happened to their family. Even a small choice deserved respect. Ruth opened the door. Owen stepped inside. He did not begin with excuses. He did not describe his fear of the robber or explain how Vance's office had influenced him. He did not ask Silas to understand how difficult the situation had been. He said he was sorry. He admitted that before the hearing, Vance's assistant had warned him about lawsuits, insurance investigations, and public blame. He admitted that no one had ordered him to lie. They had only shown him the consequences of remembering correctly. Owen had chosen fear. Silas had paid for it. Owen placed the box on the table. Inside was the red rooster clock. Its hands had been removed and wrapped in paper. Dust covered the chipped wooden body. Without the hands, the pale face looked strangely empty. Owen said he could no longer keep it in the store. Every time he looked at it, he saw the truth he had refused to face. But the clock had belonged to his wife, and he could not throw it away. He asked Silas to repair it one more time. Not for Marlowe's corner market, for his wife's grave. Ruth looked at Silas. Caleb looked at the clock. Silas remained silent for a long time. People often imagine forgiveness as a sudden, beautiful decision. Caleb learned that day that real forgiveness could feel more like opening the back of a damaged clock. A person did not know what condition the mechanism was in until the cover came off. Some parts might be cleaned, some might need replacement, some might never work as before. Finally, Silas agreed to repair it. Owen released a breath. Then Silas said he would charge him a fair price. Not more because of what happened. Not less because of guilt. Fair. Owen nodded immediately. He seemed relieved to pay. The price acknowledged that repair required labor and that the past had carried a cost. Before leaving, Owen apologized to Ruth. She told him she was not ready to forgive him. He lowered his head and said he understood. That was the first moment Caleb believed Owen's remorse might be real. True remorse did not demand comfort from the people it had harmed. Silas and Caleb repaired the rooster clock in the back of the new shop before opening day. They placed it beneath the workbench lamp. Silas removed the back while Caleb arranged the screws on dark velvet. The movement was dirty. One gear had worn unevenly. The minute hand had been bent during removal. Dust had gathered around the spring. The clock had not been destroyed. It had been neglected. Caleb watched his father clean each part. For the first time since prison, Silas's movements became fully steady. His hands remembered a language the rest of him was still relearning. Caleb polished the gear teeth. Silas adjusted the spring. Together, they realigned the hands. When Silas returned the movement to its case and wound it, nothing happened. Caleb's heart sank. Silas waited. He moved the pendulum gently. The clock ticked once, then again. The rhythm strengthened. Ruth stood in the doorway. Marion had stopped sorting boxes in the front room. All four listened. The sound was soft, steady. No one claimed the clock had redeemed the suffering. A repaired object could not return 2 years. But its ticking carried a meaning none of them needed to explain. The truth had been there all along. It had waited in the background until someone looked closely enough to hear it. Opening day arrived 1 year after Silas's release. Caleb wore a clean shirt. Ruth placed flowers in the window. Marion brought a cake that leaned to one side and insisted that perfectly straight cakes should never be trusted. At 9 o'clock, Silas stood beside the front door. For 2 years, other people had controlled every door he entered and left. Prison doors opened by command. Courtroom doors opened under guard. Even the laundromat room belonged to someone else. This door belonged to him. He turned the sign to open. The bell rang cleanly. For several minutes, no one came. Then an elderly woman entered with a pocket watch wrapped in a handkerchief. A church deacon followed with a mantel clock and an apology he could not say without looking at the floor. A young mother brought a cheap plastic clock shaped like a sunflower. She admitted it would cost less to buy a new one, but it had belonged to her grandmother. Silas accepted every repair with the same attention. By noon, the shelves were full. The town had not become perfect. Some people came because they were sorry. Some came because the Turners were now part of a story everyone wanted to stand beside. Some claimed they had always doubted the conviction, though Ruth remembered their silence clearly. She let them enter. She did not let them rewrite the past. Owen collected the rooster clock 2 days later. Silas placed it on the counter between them. The hands now moved accurately. The chipped paint remained. Silas had offered to restore the wooden body, but Owen asked him not to. He wanted the cracks to remain visible. He paid the full price. Before leaving, he looked at Caleb and said, he hoped the boy became whatever kind of man he wanted to become, not what strangers expected after the hearing. Caleb did not know how to respond. He nodded. Owen carried the clock away with both hands. Later, Silas framed an enlarged section of the original security photograph and hung it above the workbench. He cropped out the robber. He removed the counter and most of the store. Only the rooster clock and the timestamp remained. The timestamp read 8:18. The clock showed 9:18. Customers often asked why he kept an image connected to such a painful period. Silas always answered the same way. The truth was there from the beginning. The independent review of Vance's cases continued for more than a year. Thomas Reed's conviction was overturned. The young mother accused in the pharmacy case received a new trial, and the charges were dismissed after investigators confirmed her clinic alibi. Another man's sentence was reduced after hidden timeline inconsistencies undermined the prosecution's version of events. The Turner Review, as newspapers began calling it, did not prove every convicted person innocent. It did something more important and less dramatic. It forced the county to look again. New rules required independent verification of digital timestamps before trial. Surveillance systems had to be checked for time zone errors, power resets, and daylight saving time settings. Prosecutors could no longer present electronic time data as unquestionable without documenting how it had been verified. Marion became involved in a small legal aid project reviewing evidence in old cases. She complained constantly about the workload while arriving early every morning. Caleb continued visiting her at the library. He read appeals, evidence standards, and cases involving mistaken identification. He did not study because he believed the law was pure. He had seen what happened when law was handled carelessly. He studied because the law was too powerful to be left only to people who enjoyed hearing themselves speak. No one forced him to decide whether he would become a lawyer. Silas told him he had already spent enough of his childhood solving adult failures. So Caleb returned to school, repaired clocks on Saturdays, played basketball badly, and sometimes went entire days without thinking about a courtroom. That was its own kind of victory. 2 years after Silas's release, Judge Helena Cross visited Turner & Son Clockworks just before closing. She came alone, without robes, staff, or cameras. In her hands was a small wooden desk clock. Silas welcomed her politely. Caleb looked up from his homework. Judge Cross explained that the clock had belonged to her father. It had stopped years earlier, but she had kept it on her desk because some things remained important even when they no longer moved. She placed it on the counter. Then she looked at Caleb. She told him that courtrooms were filled with trained voices, confident voices, expensive voices, and voices accustomed to being obeyed. But during Silas's hearing, the smallest voice in the room had asked the clearest question. Caleb lowered his eyes. Praise still made him uncomfortable. Silas rescued him by asking the judge what seemed to be wrong with the clock. Judge Cross smiled and admitted she did not know. She said she had learned not to assume. After she left, Caleb asked his father whether justice had finally been done. Silas turned the judge's clock over in his hands. He listened to the silence inside it. Then he said, justice had begun. Caleb understood the difference. Done would mean the years returned. Done would mean Turner Clockworks never closed. Done would mean Ruth never slept in a chair. Caleb was never mocked. Owen never hid behind fear. And Vance never built a career by transforming uncertainty into guilt. Begun meant something smaller. Silas was home. The lie had been named. Several forgotten cases had been reopened. People were checking the clocks. After great harm, beginning was sometimes the only honest miracle available. That evening, Caleb and Silas closed the shop together. Ruth had gone ahead to prepare dinner. Marion had left a stack of papers on the counter with a note demanding coffee before anyone asked her to read them. The library lights glowed next door. Caleb turned off the front display. Around him, dozens of clocks continued ticking. They did not tick together. Some moved half a second ahead. Some fell slightly behind. Some sounded deep and formal. Others clicked softly. Yet each was being watched, adjusted, and cared for. The sound had once filled Caleb's childhood. Then it disappeared. Now it had returned. Not unchanged. Nothing truly returned unchanged. Silas stood beside him and listened. He said people often believed time only took things away. Youth, homes, chances, people we loved. But time also revealed. It wore paint from lies. It loosened what had been nailed shut. It carried buried details forward until someone patient enough noticed them. Caleb looked at the framed photograph. 8:18 in the corner, 9:18 on the wall. One wrong hour. On paper, it had looked like a technical mistake, a forgotten setting, a minor oversight. But that hour had taken a father from his son, a husband from his wife, a shop from its owner, and trust from a family that had done nothing to deserve losing it. Caleb had learned that small details were never small when powerful people built entire stories on top of them. A wrong hour could become a prison sentence. A flipped sign could become a clue. A frightened witness could become part of a lie. A child's question could become a key. And a clock no one bothered to examine could become the most honest witness in the room. Years later, people would still ask Caleb how he noticed what trained investigators, lawyers, and prosecutors had missed. He never liked the question. It made the answer sound like magic. There had been no magic. There had been prison visits, unpaid bills, library dust, pencil marks, sleepless nights, Marion's patience, Ruth's strength, Silas's lessons, and one child who refused to accept that a closed case meant a correct one. So Caleb answered simply. He noticed because his father had taught him to look at what everyone else dismissed. That was all. And that was everything. Injustice does not always arrive wearing a cruel face. Sometimes it arrives through hurry, through convenience, through a prosecutor who wants a clean victory, a lawyer too exhausted to ask one more question, a witness too frightened to correct the story, and a town too comfortable believing that the person closest to suspicion must be guilty. Justice does not always return with thunder. Sometimes it returns through an old woman reading records at a library table. Sometimes it returns through a mother who keeps standing after the world has taken almost everything. Sometimes it returns through a man who still believes broken things deserve care. And sometimes it returns through a 10-year-old boy standing on a wooden platform, asking an ordinary question that powerful adults were too certain to consider. The story of Silas and Caleb Turner was never proof that pain always carried a purpose. Pain did not become good simply because someone survived it. Nor was it proof that the system always corrected itself. Systems rarely correct themselves without people willing to disturb their comfort. The lesson was more honest than that. Never let confidence replace truth. Never allow authority to make you ashamed of asking a simple question. And never ignore a small detail, because powerful people are in a hurry to move on. Because somewhere, behind the person everyone is staring at, there may be a clock still pointing toward the truth. And sometimes, one honest question is enough to make the entire room finally hear it. Flight 718 entered the storm.
Captain's down! I need help!
Lightning tore across the cabin.
Everyone stay seated.
Then the captain collapsed.
Captain, stay with me!
All 186 lives held still.
Can anyone here fly this aircraft?
From seat 34B, Maya stood.
I can help.
She had no uniform or badge, only an old leather bag and a name the airline feared.
He said she could not fly.
She was fired for a reason.
3 years earlier, Maya wore captain stripes.
Sign the report, then walk away.
It started with one missing number.
The records don't match.
But to understand why Graham Voss was more afraid of Maya Reed than of the storm outside, we have to go back 3 years. To the morning she first noticed a single missing number in an aircraft maintenance record. At the time, Maya still wore the Aurora Skies uniform with pride. She had earned every stripe on it the difficult way. There had been no family money paying for flight hours, no powerful relatives opening doors, and no easy path from the neighborhood where she grew up to the left seat of a commercial aircraft. Her father, Daniel Reed, had spent most of his life working beneath airplanes rather than inside them. He was an avionics technician, one of those men passengers never saw, but depended on every time a plane rose above the clouds. Daniel had taught Maya that aircraft did not become dangerous all at once. A disaster rarely began with fire, smoke, or a screaming alarm. More often, it began with one small shortcut that nobody wanted to question. A number entered incorrectly. A warning cleared too quickly. A part marked as replaced when it had only been reset. A supervisor deciding that a delay would cost more than a risk. When Maya was a little girl, she used to sit beside him in the garage while he repaired radios, test panels, and old electrical equipment from the hangar. He would place a wiring diagram in front of her and explain that every line had a purpose. Even the smallest connection mattered because machines did not care whether people were tired, impatient, rich, or powerful. A system either worked properly or it did not. Those lessons stayed with Maya long after she became a pilot. She was never the loudest captain at Aurora Skies. She did not enjoy drawing attention to herself. She did not try to impress crews by acting fearless. What made her respected was the fact that she prepared more carefully than anyone expected. She studied weather patterns before every flight. She read maintenance notes instead of skipping past them. She listened to ground crews. She checked again when something did not make sense. That habit had saved passengers from minor trouble more than once. A faulty cargo warning, an incorrect fuel figure, a hydraulic message that turned out to be nothing serious. Most people in the company saw those delays as inconveniences. Maya saw them as proof that carefulness was not paranoia. Then came Flight 216 from Dallas to Phoenix. It was an ordinary overnight route. The passengers were tired. The cabin crew wanted an on-time departure. The weather was clear, and the aircraft had already been delayed once because of a late inbound connection. It should have been a simple flight, the kind people forgot the moment they landed. But while reviewing the maintenance log, Maya noticed that an electrical distribution unit had been marked as replaced during the previous week. The entry looked complete at first glance. The date was there. The technician's name was there. The maintenance release was signed. Only one thing was missing: the serial number of the replacement unit. For most people, it would have meant nothing. A missing number in a long page of technical records could easily be a clerical mistake. But Maya knew that components like that were tracked for a reason. A part's serial number told the company where it came from, how old it was, what service history it carried, and whether it had been connected to previous incidents. She asked the ground maintenance team to verify the record. The technician checked the paperwork, then checked again. He looked uncomfortable. He told Maya the part had been inspected and the aircraft was safe to fly. Maya did not accuse him of lying. She did not raise her voice. She simply asked to see the replacement documentation. It was not available. She asked for the maintenance supervisor. The supervisor arrived irritated, already aware that passengers were waiting at the gate. He explained that the component had been dealt with, that the issue was minor, and that the aircraft had completed several flights since then without any problems. Maya understood the pressure. Every minute on the ground cost the airline money. Every delay created complaints. Every cancellation turned into a report that climbed upward through management. But an aircraft was not safer because it had been lucky. She refused to sign the release until the records were verified. The flight was delayed. Passengers complained. Gate agents apologized. The company's operations center called repeatedly. By the time the documents finally arrived, the problem had been explained away as a simple database error. The part had supposedly been replaced correctly, and the missing number had supposedly been omitted during a system transfer. Maya allowed the flight to continue only after the aircraft passed a more detailed inspection. It landed safely in Phoenix. But Maya could not forget the feeling she had when she looked at that incomplete record. Over the next several months, she started noticing similar inconsistencies across Aurora Skies' older fleet. A repeated electrical warning that disappeared after a reset. A maintenance sign-off completed at a time when the technician had been assigned to another airport. Components marked as replaced without a matching inventory transfer. Aircraft that seemed to suffer the same minor problems again and again, but never long enough to trigger a formal grounding. At first, Maya believed the airline had a paperwork problem. Then she began to suspect that it had a safety problem. The more she looked, the more patterns appeared. The aircraft involved were not random. Many belonged to the same group of older planes that had been modified during a cost-cutting program. Several had used components supplied by a contractor called Horizon Avionics Solutions. The company had been praised publicly for helping Aurora Skies reduce maintenance expenses and improve turnaround time. But Daniel Reed had once warned Maya about companies that made their profits by promising that expensive problems could disappear cheaply. He had told her that the cheapest part was often the most expensive one in the long run. Maya compiled everything she found into a formal safety report. She was careful. She did not write with anger. She did not make accusations she could not prove. She listed the aircraft numbers, the dates, the recurring warnings, the incomplete records, and the supplier details. Then she requested an independent audit. For 2 weeks, no one responded. At first, she assumed the report had been lost in the system. Then she received an invitation to a private meeting with Aurora Skies management. That was where she met Graham Voss for the first time. Back then, Voss was not yet the chief executive officer. He was the airline's chief operations strategist, a title that sounded technical enough to be trusted and vague enough to hide the power behind it. He was known for saving money without appearing cruel. He had a talent for making difficult decisions sound reasonable. Investors liked him because profits rose wherever he went. Executives liked him because he never created public scandals. Employees feared him because people who crossed him often found themselves quietly removed from the path ahead. Maya entered the meeting room believing someone had finally taken her concerns seriously. Voss greeted her warmly. He praised her flight record. He spoke about her discipline, her professionalism, and the fact that Aurora Skies needed pilots who cared deeply about safety. Then the tone shifted. He suggested that Maya had become too emotionally invested in technical details outside her direct area of responsibility. He explained that maintenance teams had already reviewed the issue. He reminded her that pilots and engineers needed to trust one another. He implied that her persistence was creating tension inside the company. Nothing he said sounded openly threatening. That was what made it dangerous. By the end of the meeting, Maya realized that Voss was not trying to understand her report. He was trying to make her doubt it. He wanted her to believe that asking questions had made her difficult. He wanted her to believe that being careful had made her disruptive. He wanted her to feel ashamed for caring more about the truth than the company's image. Maya left the meeting unsettled, but she did not withdraw the report. Instead, she filed a second one. That was when Aurora Skies stopped treating her as an employee and began treating her as a problem. Within weeks, Maya was removed from active flight duty pending an internal review. No one explained what the review involved. No one gave her a clear timeline. She was asked to attend meetings where people spoke around the issue without ever addressing it directly. Her supervisors became distant. Colleagues who once trusted her stopped returning messages. Then the rumors began. Anonymous sources told aviation websites that a captain at Aurora Skies had repeatedly caused delays by overreacting to minor maintenance concerns. Industry forums began discussing an unnamed pilot who had supposedly clashed with ground crews. A columnist wrote about the danger of allowing personal anxiety to influence professional judgment. Maya's name was not mentioned at first. It did not need to be. Inside the airline, everyone knew who the story was about. Months later, when Aurora Skies finally released its decision, the company did not accuse Maya of misconduct. They did not claim she had broken any regulation. They did not say she was unqualified. They used softer words. They stated that her employment had ended because of concerns about professional collaboration and operational judgment. It was enough. Her licenses remained valid. Her training record remained strong. But no major airline wanted to hire a pilot whose former company had quietly labeled her a risk. Maya appealed. She requested access to the maintenance records that had prompted her report. She contacted regulators. She spoke to lawyers. But every path seemed to lead back to the same invisible wall. The airline insisted that its fleet was safe. The records she requested were delayed, restricted, or declared confidential. Her report was marked as unsubstantiated. The company moved on, and so did everyone else, except Maya. She did not stop believing that something was wrong. She simply ran out of people willing to listen. The hardest part was not losing the uniform. It was losing the future she had spent her entire life building. For years, she had imagined the first day she would become a captain. She had imagined the weight of the jacket on her shoulders, the sound of her name spoken over the cabin speakers, and the quiet pride on her father's face when he saw her standing beside an aircraft. Daniel Reed had lived long enough to see her earn that title. but he did not live long enough to see what Aurora Skies did to her. He had died a year before Maya filed the report, leaving behind a small metal case filled with old notes, component numbers, supplier records, and handwritten observations from his own years in aviation. At the time, Maya had thought of it only as a piece of him she could not bear to throw away. She carried that case everywhere, not because she believed it contained the answer to anything, but because it reminded her that someone had once taught her not to look away when the truth became inconvenient. After Aurora Skies pushed her out, Maya took whatever work she could find. She taught emergency procedures at a simulator center outside the city. She trained student pilots who dreamed of flying for airlines one day. She showed them how to handle engine failures, severe weather, rapid descents, and instrument malfunctions. At night, after the students went home, Maya sometimes stayed behind. She would sit alone in the simulator, surrounded by artificial screens and plastic controls, looking at a runway that was not real and listening to a wind that did not exist. She still knew every procedure. She still remembered every call-out. She still dreamed about flying. But she no longer believed the industry would ever allow her back into a real cockpit. That was why she had booked the cheapest seat she could find on Aurora Skies Flight 718. She was traveling to an interview for a small training position in another state. The job did not offer prestige. It did not offer a captain's salary. It did not even guarantee that she would ever fly a real aircraft again. But it offered something she had almost stopped expecting: a reason to stay close to the sky. She had boarded the flight quietly, kept her head down, and chosen seat 34B near the back. She had no idea Graham Voss would be sitting in first class. She had no idea Captain Luis Herrera would collapse. She had no idea that the aircraft would enter a storm, carrying the exact kind of danger she had tried to expose. But when the cabin lights flickered and the first warning chime sounded, Maya felt something old awaken inside her. Not panic. Recognition. The sound was wrong. The pattern was wrong. And when Nora Bell asked if anyone on board knew how to fly, Maya had understood that remaining silent would be the same as helping the lie survive. So she stood. Now, as Nora guided her toward the cockpit, Maya could feel the eyes of the passengers following her. Some looked hopeful. Some looked afraid. A few looked at her with the same suspicion Graham Voss had planted in the cabin only moments earlier. But Maya did not look back. She had spent 3 years trying to prove that she belonged in the sky. This time, she did not need anyone's permission. The cockpit door opened. The air inside was cold and sharp. Rain hammered against the windshield. Captain Herrera lay unconscious in the left seat, while 2 passengers with medical training worked beside him. Evan Cole, the first officer, was gripping the controls with both hands, trying to manage the aircraft, the weather, the warning systems, and his own fear all at once. Maya stepped forward. Then she looked at the maintenance display. For 1 second, everything inside her went still. The aircraft registration number glowing on the screen was one she knew. It belonged to one of the exact planes listed in the report Aurora Skies had buried 3 years earlier. And suddenly, Maya understood that the storm was not the only thing trying to bring Flight 718 down. The moment the cockpit door closed behind Maya Reed, the storm stopped being something she could watch from a passenger window. It became a living force that pressed against every surface around her. Rain struck the windshield in violent sheets. Lightning turned the cockpit white for half a second at a time. Warning tones rose and disappeared beneath the growl of the engines, while the aircraft shuddered through air that no longer felt stable. Captain Luis Herrera sat motionless in the left seat, his eyes closed, his body held in place by the harness. He had collapsed only minutes earlier, leaving Evan Cole, the young first officer, alone with a medical emergency, severe weather, and a panel of instruments that seemed to be losing faith in themselves one screen at a time. Evan did not look like the kind of pilot who had ever imagined failure. He was trained, polished, and careful. He had spent years learning procedures, memorizing limitations, and proving that he belonged in the right seat of a commercial jet. But training had a way of becoming something very different. When the cockpit was dark, the captain was unconscious, and 186 lives were sitting behind a locked door. Maya understood that fear. She had known it long before Aurora Skies had taken her uniform, her cockpit, and the career she had once believed would define her life. Fear was not always loud. Sometimes it sat quietly in the room, hiding behind a steady voice and a professional posture, waiting for one small failure to become another. She did not begin by trying to take control of everything. That would have been useless. Evan was still flying the aircraft. The engines were still running. The airplane still had a path through the storm, even if that path was narrowing by the second. What Evan needed was not someone to make him feel smaller. He needed someone who could separate the emergency into pieces small enough to survive. Maya told him to stay with the essentials: airspeed, altitude, direction. Nothing else mattered until those things were secure. The rest of the cockpit could flash, chime, and threaten all it wanted. Panic would come from trying to solve every problem at once. Survival would come from handling the next problem first. For a few seconds, Evan's breathing slowed. His hands remained tight around the controls, but they stopped moving with the helpless urgency of someone searching for a miracle. Maya watched him settle into the rhythm of the work. He was still frightened. He was still young, but he was listening. Outside the cockpit, Nora Bell moved through the cabin with the kind of calm that could only come from someone who understood how much people needed to borrow courage from another person. She did not promise the passengers that everything would be fine. Promises were dangerous at 37,000 feet. Instead, she gave them instructions, routines, and the steady presence of someone who refused to let fear become contagious. Most of the passengers did not know exactly what had happened. They only knew that the captain had stopped speaking. The lights had flickered, and the storm outside looked less like weather and more like a wall. Some held hands with strangers. Some stared at the ceiling as if the aircraft might answer their questions. Some prayed in silence. And in first class, Graham Voss sat surrounded by comfort that suddenly meant nothing. Voss had spent his life believing that every crisis could be controlled by the right person in the right room. He knew how to make nervous investors feel confident. He knew how to turn bad press into reassuring language. He knew how to bury a problem beneath legal statements and polished smiles. But the cockpit of Flight 718 was not a boardroom. It did not care who owned the company, who had influence, or who could afford the best attorneys. The storm did not recognize titles, and for the first time in years, Graham Voss was trapped in a place where the woman he had tried to erase was more valuable than he was. Maya studied the flickering displays, while Evan followed the emergency procedures. A navigation screen went dark, returned, then began showing incomplete information. One electrical warning appeared and disappeared. Another followed. The failures were not dramatic enough to look like a total collapse, but they were too strange to ignore. They came in bursts, almost as if the aircraft were trying to tell them something and could not decide whether it had the strength to keep speaking. Then Maya saw the aircraft registration number on a small maintenance screen. For one moment, the storm disappeared from her mind. She knew that aircraft, not because she had flown it often, but because she had seen its records before. 3 years earlier, when she had still worn Aurora Sky's captain's stripes, she had found a missing number in a maintenance report tied to an electrical replacement. At the time, it had looked like a small inconsistency, a missing serial number, a skipped verification line, a document that seemed to have been cleaned too carefully. But Maya had learned from her father that the smallest missing detail could carry the largest warning. Daniel Reed had worked around aircraft systems for most of his life. He was not famous. He did not have a high-ranking office or a seat in executive meetings. He was simply the kind of technician who noticed what other people ignored. He noticed when parts were listed as new, but carried the wear of older units. He noticed when records were signed too quickly. He noticed when aircraft behaved differently after rain, after heavy electrical demand, or after long hours in difficult weather. He had never believed that danger announced itself loudly. Most danger, he used to say, began as something people found convenient to overlook. Maya had carried that lesson with her into every cockpit she had ever entered. And now, as she watched the displays flicker on Flight 718, she understood something that made her chest tighten. The storm had not created the problem. The storm had forced it into the open. She asked Nora to bring the worn leather bag from her seat in row 34B. Nora did not ask why. She had seen enough in Maya's face to understand that this was not a request made out of fear. It was a request made because Maya had found a thread, and she intended to follow it. While Nora made her way through the cabin, Evan reported the aircraft status to air traffic control. He declared the medical emergency. He reported the electrical failures. He requested priority handling. His voice was still strained, but it had changed. It no longer sounded like someone waiting to be rescued. It sounded like someone beginning to believe he might be able to help rescue others. Then Aurora Sky's operations called the cockpit. At first, the voice on the radio sounded controlled and professional. The operations representative asked about the captain's condition, the instrument failures, and the aircraft's ability to continue. But then came a question that did not belong in an emergency call. They asked whether Maya Reed was in the cockpit. For a moment, the storm seemed quieter. Evan looked toward Maya. Nora, who had returned with the leather bag, stood near the cockpit door and understood immediately that the company had not learned Maya's name by accident. Graham Voss had already made his calls. He had already started trying to shape the story before the aircraft had even touched the ground. Maya had once been afraid of what her name could do to her. She had watched it become a warning whispered in airline offices. She had watched former colleagues avoid her because defending her might make them inconvenient too. She had watched her career become a rumor that other people used to protect themselves. But the storm had stripped away every reason to be afraid. She told operations the truth. She was a former Aurora Sky's captain with experience on that aircraft type. She was assisting the first officer during an active medical emergency. The aircraft needed priority. The crew needed a safe runway. Nothing else mattered. The operations representative suggested a diversion to a larger company-controlled airport farther away, where Aurora Skies could send its own staff and manage the emergency privately. It sounded reasonable to anyone who did not understand what the aircraft was telling them. But Maya understood. A farther airport meant more time inside the storm. More time meant more moisture, more electrical demand, more chances for the unstable system to fail again. And a company-controlled airport would give Graham Voss more time to gather people, shape records, and decide which version of the truth the world would hear first. Maya did not argue emotionally. She did not mention Voss. She did not make accusations over an open radio frequency. She simply explained the facts to Evan, and Evan made the decision that mattered. Greybridge Field was closer. Greybridge Field had a runway long enough for the aircraft if the approach remained stable. Greybridge Field had emergency crews ready, and Greybridge Field was the safest option they had. The controller confirmed the diversion. That was the moment Graham Voss began to lose control. Behind the cockpit door, he could still make phone calls. He could still speak to company lawyers and senior executives. He could still try to convince himself that the situation could be contained. But every minute, Flight 718 moved toward Greybridge Field. The possibility of containment became smaller. If the aircraft landed safely, investigators would examine it. If investigators examined it, they would find the electrical components. If they found the components, they would find the maintenance records. And if they found the records, they might discover why Maya Reed had been forced out 3 years earlier. Nora returned to the cabin after bringing Maya's bag forward. She moved from row to row with a steadiness that kept the passengers from seeing how serious the situation had become. A young mother held her daughter close. An elderly man kept his eyes shut and whispered words only he could hear. A boy with a small toy airplane no longer asked his mother whether they would be all right. He simply gripped the toy in both hands and stared at the darkness beyond the window. Near the front of the cabin, one passenger stood despite the seatbelt sign and demanded answers. He wanted to know why the captain was not speaking. He wanted to know why a woman with a controversial past had been allowed into the cockpit. He spoke loudly because fear often tries to disguise itself as anger. Nora did not give him the story he wanted. She told him that the crew was handling an emergency and that everyone on board needed to remain seated. When he continued to protest, the aircraft dropped hard through a pocket of turbulence. His balance disappeared before his argument did. He grabbed the top of a seat and realized in one sudden and humiliating instant that there were no important passengers on that airplane. There were only people who needed the crew to bring them home. He sat down. In the cockpit, Maya opened the old metal case from her bag. Inside were the notes her father had kept for years. Some were stained from workshops and rain. Some were folded at the corners. Some carried diagrams that only someone trained to recognize patterns would understand. Daniel Reed had never expected those pages to become evidence. He had written them because he believed that knowledge had a duty. If something dangerous was happening, someone had to leave a record of it. Maya found the page she was looking for. It described a family of electrical units that could behave unpredictably under extreme moisture and fluctuating demand. The failures could begin quietly. A display could reset. A warning could blink and disappear. A circuit could recover just long enough for someone to decide there was no real problem. But under pressure, the instability could spread. Maya looked from the notebook to the failing display. The patterns matched. It was not proof of every detail. Not yet. But it was enough to understand the immediate danger. The aircraft still had reliable primary data. The engines were stable. The flight controls were responding. But the electronic systems could no longer be trusted completely. And the longer they stayed inside the storm, the more dangerous that uncertainty became. She explained what she believed to Evan without overwhelming him. The goal was not to solve 3 years of corruption in the middle of a storm. The goal was to land the airplane before the next failure took away something they could not afford to lose, Evan listened. Then he did something Maya would remember long after the flight was over. He stopped trying to prove that he was in control. Instead, he accepted help. That was the difference between arrogance and courage. Arrogance demanded that a person face danger alone, so no one could see them afraid. Courage understood that survival sometimes required trusting the person beside you. The descent toward Greybridge Field began. The aircraft entered lower cloud, where the rain felt heavier and the turbulence sharper. Every few seconds, lightning exposed the wings before returning them to darkness. The runway lights appeared once through the weather, then vanished again. The cockpit was no longer full of alarms, but the silence between the warnings felt worse. Air traffic control reported worsening wind conditions. Rainwater had begun pooling along parts of the runway. Several aircraft had already diverted. Emergency vehicles were waiting near the landing area, their lights reflecting through the storm like distant signals from another world. Maya studied the approach information. The conditions were difficult, but not impossible. That distinction mattered. They did not have a normal landing ahead of them. They had an exhausted first officer, a captain who could not help, unreliable displays, a severe crosswind, and a system defect that seemed to be spreading through the aircraft in slow, deliberate waves. But they also had a runway. They had engines. They had enough instruments. And they had time if they did not waste it. Maya told Evan they would need to prepare for a manual approach. The automated systems had done enough to bring them close, but the final moments would depend on human judgment. Evan hesitated, not because he did not understand, but because he understood exactly how much was being asked of him. Maya did not tell him to be fearless. She reminded him that fear was not the enemy. Losing focus was. He had the aircraft beneath his hands. He had the runway ahead. He had the training he had spent years earning. And he had someone beside him who knew what it felt like to carry a room full of strangers through the worst moment of their lives. Evan nodded. The clouds thinned for a few seconds. Below them, Greybridge Field appeared. The runway lights glowed through the rain, narrow and distant, surrounded by darkness. For one brief moment, everyone in the cockpit could see where they needed to go. Then a powerful gust hit the aircraft from the side. The plane rolled sharply. A warning tone sounded. The remaining navigation display flickered again. Evan's breath caught. The runway vanished behind rain. And somewhere in the cabin, 186 people realized that the most dangerous part of the flight had only just begun. For a few seconds, there was no runway. There was only rain. There was only wind. There was only the violent sound of an aircraft being pushed sideways through the dark by forces no human being could control. Evan tightened his grip on the controls, but Maya could see the moment when fear tried to take over again. It was there in the way his eyes moved too quickly from one instrument to another. It was there in the breath he did not finish. It was there in the silence that came just before someone either found their training or lost it. Maya stayed with him. She did not take the airplane from his hands. She did not try to become the hero of the story by doing everything herself. Evan was the pilot flying, and the only way they would survive was if he remained connected to the aircraft instead of surrendering to panic. So Maya gave him one instruction at a time. She kept his attention on the remaining instruments. She helped him trust the physical feel of the aircraft when the screens could not be trusted. She reminded him that a crosswind did not need to be defeated. It needed to be understood. The plane would move. The storm would push. Their job was not to force the sky into obedience. Their job was to make the next correct decision before the next dangerous second arrived. Behind them, Nora kept the cabin from falling apart. The passengers could feel the descent. They could feel the aircraft being thrown from side to side. They heard the engines change as Evan adjusted power. They heard the storm strike the fuselage like heavy stones. Some people cried. Some people held the hands of strangers. Some stared at the seatbacks in front of them because looking out the window felt impossible. Nora moved through that fear with the quiet strength of someone who understood that people did not always need answers. Sometimes they needed a face that told them they had not been abandoned. She checked seatbelts. She helped a frightened child hold on to a parent's hand. She guided an elderly passenger through slow breaths. And when panic rose near the front of the cabin, she did not allow it to become a fire that spread through the rows. Even Graham Voss had gone quiet. The man who had tried to stop Maya from reaching the cockpit could no longer pretend that he was protecting anyone. Every new movement of the aircraft reminded him that the woman he had tried to destroy was now helping save his life. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that the truth was not dangerous because it embarrassed him. The truth was dangerous because it had consequences. The runway lights appeared again. This time, they did not vanish immediately. They were still distant, still blurred by rain, still narrow enough to make the approach feel unforgiving. But they were there. Evan saw them. Maya saw them. And in that moment, the cockpit changed. Not because the danger had passed, but because uncertainty had become a direction. The aircraft continued downward. Wind struck again, harder than before. The nose shifted. The wings dipped. The wet runway moved across the windshield, then disappeared at the edge of Maya's vision. Evan corrected too sharply at first, then steadied himself when Maya reminded him to make smaller movements. The storm wanted panic. It wanted a desperate reaction. But Maya had learned long ago that the most dangerous mistakes were usually born from trying to fix everything too fast. The plane crossed the threshold. For one endless second, it seemed as though the runway would remain just out of reach. Then the wheels touched down. The landing was hard. The aircraft hit the wet pavement with enough force to throw the cabin forward against its seatbelts. Water erupted from beneath the tires. Reverse thrust filled the night with a roar. The runway lights streaked past the windows as Evan held the aircraft straight through the wind. No one cheered immediately. The people in the cabin were too afraid to trust what they had felt. They waited. They waited for the engines to quiet. They waited for the violent shaking to stop. They waited for the aircraft to slow enough for their bodies to believe what their minds could not yet accept. Then Flight 718 came to a stop. For several seconds, there was only rain tapping against the fuselage and the broken sound of people trying to breathe again. Then someone began to cry. Someone else began to clap. The applause spread slowly. Not as celebration at first, but as release. People held one another. Parents pressed their faces into their children's hair. Strangers, who had never spoken before, reached across the aisle and touched each other's hands. They had gone into the storm as passengers, but they came through it as witnesses to the same impossible night. In the cockpit, Evan leaned back from the controls with the stunned expression of a man who had just discovered how close he had come to losing everything. He had not flown perfectly. No one could have in those conditions. But he had stayed present. He had listened. He had learned that courage was not a performance. It was a decision made over and over again when every part of you wanted to give up. Maya sat beside him, exhausted, but still. She did not raise her arms. She did not ask for recognition. She looked through the rain-streaked windshield toward the emergency lights waiting on the runway. And for the first time in 3 years, She allowed herself to feel something she had tried not to need. She felt seen, not by executives, not by reporters, not by the company that had taken everything from her. She felt seen by the truth itself. Captain Luis Herrera was taken from the cockpit after the aircraft had stopped and received urgent medical care. He survived. The medical crisis had been serious, but it was not the end of his story. Later, after he learned what had happened, he would understand that the people he had trusted behind him had carried his passengers through the one moment when he could not. But the night was not over. The moment the wheels touched the ground, Flight 718 stopped being only an emergency landing. It became evidence. Investigators entered the cockpit before the storm had fully moved away from Graybridge Field. They secured the flight data. They documented the electrical warnings. They examined the maintenance history. They took custody of the component information. And when Maya placed her father's metal case on the table in the airport interview room, the old notes that had once seemed like the private worry of an ignored technician became part of a much larger question. Why had the aircraft failed the way it had? Why did its maintenance records contain gaps? Why had Maya Reed been removed from Aurora Skies after raising similar concerns 3 years earlier? And why had Graham Voss seemed so terrified the moment he learned she was in the cockpit? Voss tried to regain control the way he always had. He made calls. He asked for lawyers. He attempted to frame the situation as an unfortunate combination of weather, a medical emergency, and an employee with a personal grievance against the airline. He wanted investigators to see Maya as a former captain who had returned to the cockpit carrying old resentment. But that story collapsed as soon as the evidence began to speak. The flight data recorder showed the sequence of electrical failures. The maintenance records revealed repeated component changes that did not match the parts supposedly installed. The missing number Maya had noticed years earlier turned out not to be a harmless clerical error. It had broken the chain of identification for a series of units that should never have returned to active aircraft service. Components had been listed as new when they had been rebuilt, relabeled, and moved through a supplier called Horizon Avionics Solutions. At first, Horizon appeared to be only another vendor in a complicated aviation supply chain. Then investigators followed the money. They found payments routed through companies that existed mostly on paper. They found contracts approved through layers of signatures, designed to make responsibility difficult to trace. They found maintenance supervisors who had been pressured to sign forms they did not fully understand. They found workers who had been told that raising questions would cost them their jobs. And eventually, they found the financial links that connected Horizon Avionics Solutions to a network of shell companies controlled by people loyal to Graham Voss. The same man who had called Maya unstable had profited from the weakness she had tried to expose. The same man who had treated safety reports as obstacles had built a system that rewarded silence. The same man who had tried to stop Maya from reaching the cockpit had known exactly why she could not be allowed to speak. Once the truth began moving, it moved faster than Voss could contain. Former mechanics came forward. Record specialists came forward. A retired quality control manager produced copies of internal emails that had been saved in private because he had never trusted the company to keep them. A supervisor admitted that some replacement units had been approved under pressure, even when the documentation was incomplete. Another employee revealed that Maya's report had not been dismissed because it lacked evidence. It had been dismissed because it had too much. And every new witness made the old story harder to believe. Maya was called to testify before an aviation oversight panel weeks later. She arrived wearing no captain's uniform. She did not need one. The uniform had never been the source of her authority. Her authority came from the fact that she had seen danger, spoken about it, and refused to become silent when silence was easier. She did not turn the hearing into revenge. She did not raise her voice. She explained what she had found 3 years earlier. She explained why the missing number mattered. She explained how maintenance records were supposed to protect passengers, not protect executives. She explained that safety was not a slogan painted on a corporate wall. It was a series of decisions made by ordinary people who either chose to tell the truth or chose to look away. Then she opened her father's metal case. Inside were the notes Daniel Reed had written before anyone believed they would matter. He had spent his life trying to make aircraft safer. He had never asked for a title. He had never asked to be remembered. He had only believed that someone had to leave a record when something did not feel right. For years, that record had been ignored. Now it sat before the people who had the power to act. Graham Voss watched from across the hearing room as the story he had spent years controlling came apart piece by piece. The reports he had buried returned as evidence. The maintenance signatures he had trusted became questions. The missing number he had believed no one would notice became the thread that pulled the entire deception apart. His downfall was not dramatic because he shouted or confessed in front of cameras. It was dramatic because he had built his power on the belief that no one would ever make him answer for what he had done. And now, one by one, people were asking. The board removed him from his position. Federal investigators opened criminal cases connected to fraud, falsified maintenance records, and the financial network behind Horizon Avionics Solutions. Months later, Graham Voss was taken into custody, while the same news cameras he had once tried to manage waited outside. There was a certain justice in the way it happened. Voss had spent years using paperwork to hide danger. In the end, paperwork exposed him. He had silenced people by making them feel small. In the end, the people he had ignored became the witnesses who brought him down. He had treated Maya Reed's name like a problem to be erased. In the end, her name became impossible to separate from the truth. Aurora Skies offered Maya an apology. It came with compensation, public statements, and an invitation to return. They offered her a senior position. They offered to restore the career they had helped destroy. They spoke about rebuilding trust and creating a safer culture. For many people, that offer would have seemed like victory. But Maya understood something they did not. Some doors were not meant to be reopened. She accepted the apology because acknowledgement mattered. She accepted the compensation because justice did not require her to pretend that harm had never been done. But she did not return to Aurora Skies. Instead, Maya used part of what she received to build something that did not depend on anyone powerful deciding who deserved to be heard. She created the Daniel Reed Aviation Fellowship. It began in a modest simulator training center near a small airport, where young people from neighborhoods that had never seen aviation as an option could learn about aircraft systems, emergency procedures, maintenance ethics, and the responsibility that came with stepping into a cockpit. Maya did not teach them that pilots were heroes. She taught them that pilots were human. She taught them that fear was normal, but silence could be dangerous. She taught them that a checklist was not just a list of tasks. It was a promise to everyone who trusted you with their life. She taught them that when something felt wrong, they had the right to ask questions. And perhaps most importantly, she taught them that no title, no paycheck, and no powerful person was worth more than the truth. Evan Cole visited the center months after Flight 718. The storm had changed him too. He had returned to flying after additional training, but he no longer confused confidence with control. He understood that asking for help had not made him weak. It had helped save 186 people. Nora Bell came too. She stood quietly near the simulator room and watched Maya guide a nervous student through an emergency procedure. Nora had seen Maya at her lowest point, standing in a cabin aisle while a powerful man tried to stop her from doing the right thing. Now she saw what had come from that moment. Not revenge, not bitterness, purpose. Captain Luis Herrera eventually recovered and wrote Maya a letter. He did not write it as an airline captain to a former captain. He wrote it as one human being to another. He thanked her for protecting the passengers he had been unable to protect himself. He thanked her for believing in Evan when Evan had begun to doubt himself. And he thanked her for proving that a person's worth could not be decided by the people who had once tried to take everything from them. Years later, passengers still remembered Flight 718. Some remembered the storm. Some remembered the hard landing. Some remembered the woman in the ordinary coat who stood up from seat 34B when everyone else was too frightened to move. But Maya remembered something else. She remembered her father's old notes. She remembered the missing number. She remembered the years when people told her that speaking up would only make things worse. And she remembered the truth that finally carried her through the storm. The sky had never judged her by her past. It had never cared whether she wore a captain's uniform, whether an executive approved of her, or whether a company tried to erase her name. The sky only asked one thing. When people trusted her with their lives, would she respect the truth? Maya Reed did. And because she did, 186 people came home. Because she did, a man who believed he was untouchable finally had to answer for what he had done. And because she did, a new generation of future pilots, mechanics, and engineers learned that courage was not always loud. Sometimes courage was a missing number in a maintenance record. Sometimes it was an old notebook nobody wanted to read. Sometimes it was a woman standing up in seat 34B, even when the most powerful man on the plane wanted her to sit back down. The truth may take time. It may be ignored. It may be buried beneath fear, money, and silence. But when the storm comes, the truth is often the only thing strong enough to guide people home. If this story reminds you that doing the right thing matters, even when no one stands beside you, hold on to that lesson. Because the world does not become safer when brave people stay quiet. It becomes safer when they speak. 3 hours before the Saravan Cultural Council arrived to challenge Arden Museum's ownership, the museum's brightest scholars were losing a battle against a piece of clay.
We cannot let the council see uncertainty.
Then a soaked 17-year-old girl walked into the lobby, carrying a torn backpack and a volunteer application. Her name was Nadia Reyes.
Are you here for the shelter referral program?
Nadia shook her head. She had not come to ask for help. She had seen a flyer and came to apply as a volunteer.
No, I saw a flyer and came to apply as a volunteer.
But when she glanced at the digital scan of the ancient charter, her expression changed. She stepped closer to the screen.
That tablet is upside down.
The scholars turned toward Nadia in disbelief. Dr. Julian Mercer noticed her claim, not with curiosity, but with immediate contempt.
You are saying every scholar in this building has been reading it wrong?
Dr. Mercer asked where exactly she had learned to read a language trained experts had struggled with for years.
And where exactly did you learn what trained experts could not?
Nadia tightened her grip on her backpack. Then she answered that her mother had taught her everything she knew.
My mother taught me.
Then Nadia looked directly at Mercer and said the name he had hoped never to hear again, Elena Reyes.
Elena Reyes.
For the first time that morning, Dr. Julian Mercer looked afraid. The lobby became so quiet that Nadia could hear rain striking the windows. Mercer called Elena a former employee who had worked briefly as a restoration technician, trying to make Nadia's mother sound insignificant.
Your mother worked here briefly. That is all.
Nadia said the writing was not meant to be read from left to right, and that the marks along the edge were directional guides.
Those marks are not cracks. They tell you where to begin.
Nadia explained that the sentence began at the border and curved inward. Her mother had given that route a name Mercer clearly recognized.
My mother called it the Guardian's Path.
My mother called it the Guardian's Path, Nadia said. The phrase landed heavily. Mercer's expression tightened before he could stop it. The Guardian's Path. It was not a phrase a teenager would have invented. It was not something she could have guessed from a quick glance at the screen. Elena had used those exact words in her notes. They had appeared in the report Mercer had hoped would disappear forever. The junior scholars gathered closer to the monitor. One enlarged the lower border. Another brought up older scans. A third began comparing the marks against a database of known Saravan inscriptions. Their movements became slower and more deliberate. The confidence they had shown before Nadia entered the lobby had begun to dissolve. For weeks, they had been trapped inside one interpretation. They had assumed the tablet was a sale agreement because the museum had always called it one. They had assumed the first line named an owner because every exhibition label, donor brochure, and academic summary said it did. They had not tested the possibility that the first line was being read in reverse. Evelyn Hart noticed the shift. She had been standing near the reception desk moments earlier, balancing a phone call from the board with messages from legal counsel and a growing stack of problems that no one else seemed willing to solve. Evelyn was not a historian. She did not claim to understand ancient languages. Her work was more immediate and less romantic. She managed budgets, staff conflicts, insurance concerns, donors, building permits, public relations disasters, and the 1,000 small emergencies that kept Arden Museum functioning. But she understood risk, and the silence around the research screen was beginning to sound like risk. She ended her call and stepped closer. Her eyes moved from the tablet to Nadia, then from Nadia to Mercer. She asked whether the reading direction had ever been tested using the border marks as guides. No one answered immediately. That hesitation mattered. Mercer stepped in before the silence became too revealing. He said the team had examined all reasonable possibilities. He reminded Evelyn that the document had been studied by senior experts from several institutions. He warned that a museum facing an international legal challenge could not allow an unverified theory to disrupt months of preparation. He sounded calm, but he was speaking too quickly. Nadia saw it. Owen Blake saw it too. Owen was the security guard who had opened the side entrance for Nadia less than an hour earlier. At first, he had thought she had come inside to get out of the rain. Her jacket was old, her shoes were soaked, and the backpack on her shoulder looked as though it had been repaired more times than most people repaired anything. He had almost sent her away. Now he stood near the edge of the lobby, watching the museum's most respected scholar become unsettled by a phrase from an old notebook. Owen did not know the difference between a trade agreement and a custodial covenant. He did not understand Saravan grammar or ancient border signs, but he knew how people behaved when they were trying to hide fear beneath authority. Nadia continued before Mercer could close the conversation. She explained that the opening symbols did not appear to describe a sale. The grammar was wrong for that. If the border marks were followed, the first sequence became a declaration of protection. The document seemed to describe an object placed into another party's care. It sounded less like ownership and more like responsibility. That difference changed everything. A sale would mean Arden Museum had a legal claim to the relic connected to the charter. A guardianship agreement would mean the museum had only been trusted with it. And if that trust came with conditions, the museum could lose much more than an artifact. It could lose the story it had told the world for generations. The Saravan Cultural Council had spent years arguing exactly that. Their historians believed the relic had never been sold. Their legal advisors believed the museum's claim rested on a mistranslation. Their community had watched as an object tied to their own history, ceremonies, and ancestors became a centerpiece in a foreign institution. The council was not coming to Arden Museum for a polite visit. They were coming to demand answers. Mercer knew that better than anyone. He also knew that if Nadia's interpretation was correct, the charter could become evidence against him. He tried to dismiss her without appearing cruel. He said that ancient texts were filled with ambiguity. He suggested that memories of a parent's research could become distorted over time. He described Nadia's observations as interesting, but incomplete, the kind of thing that should be left to trained professionals. To anyone who did not know him, it might have sounded reasonable, but Nadia heard the message beneath it. You do not belong in this room. You do not understand what you are touching. You should be grateful that we are even listening. For a moment, she felt the old instinct disappear. She had felt it in school when teachers saw the name of the youth shelter on her records. She had felt it at social service offices when adults spoke over her as though she were a problem waiting to be processed. She had felt it at job interviews when people looked at her carefully repaired shoes and decided not to ask another question. Her mother had once told her that poor people were often expected to be grateful just for being allowed inside a room. But Elena had also told her something else. When someone becomes uncomfortable because of a question, that question is usually worth asking. Nadia opened her backpack. Inside was an old leather notebook. The cover had cracked at the corners. Several pages were held together by faded thread. The notebook had traveled with Nadia through every difficult year after her mother died. It had survived moves, shelters, temporary rooms, donated furniture, and nights when Nadia slept with it beneath her pillow because she was afraid someone might take it. To anyone else, it was only a worn book. To Nadia, it was the closest thing she had to hearing her mother's voice again. She opened it carefully. The pages were filled with copied symbols, restoration sketches, arrows, questions, and notes written in Elena Reyes's neat, steady handwriting. Some of the pages showed the Saravan Charter from different angles. Others contained close studies of the border marks. One page held a rough drawing of a narrow triangular fragment, its edges covered with small symbols. Near the bottom, Elena had written 3 words. "Third fragment missing." Mercer saw the page, and this time his reaction was impossible to miss. His face did not collapse. He did not confess. He did not make the kind of mistake people made in dramatic stories when fear became too large to hide. Instead, he went still. For a man like Mercer, stillness was more revealing than panic. Owen saw it first. Evelyn saw it next. The junior scholars looked from the notebook to Mercer, unsure why a few handwritten words had changed the entire mood of the room. Nadia explained that her mother had always believed the charter was incomplete. The main tablet contained the beginning and central terms of the agreement, but not the final condition. Without that ending, the document could be interpreted in ways that benefited the people holding it. But Elena had believed a third fragment existed, and she had believed it contained the part that mattered most. Mercer dismissed the notebook as private material with no official authority. He said that scattered notes and old sketches could not be treated as evidence. Then he turned toward Owen and instructed him to escort Nadia out of the museum. The command was quiet, direct, and final. It was the kind of order Mercer had given many times before. Most people obeyed him because they knew what happened when they did not. Careers could stall, invitations could disappear, research funding could dry up. A single bad impression from the head of a department could follow a person for years. But Owen did not move. He had spent most of his working life following instructions. Security work taught people to respect procedure. You checked badges, you followed the chain of command, you kept order. You did not insert yourself into conversations that belonged to people with more education, more money, or more authority. But as Owen looked at Nadia holding her mother's notebook, he understood that this was not about procedure. It was about whether someone with less power deserved to be heard. "I think we should verify her claim first," he said. The sentence was simple, but it changed the room. Mercer turned toward him with open irritation. A security guard was not supposed to interrupt an academic dispute. He was supposed to stand near the door and remain invisible. Owen did not look away. Evelyn made the decision before Mercer could respond. She said Nadia would stay. No one would remove her from the building. No documents connected to Elena Reyes would be taken out of the museum. And no final presentation would be given to the Sarevan Council until the old research records had been reviewed. Mercer tried to protest. Evelyn stopped him. She took the notebook from Nadia and studied the sketch of the triangular fragment. The shape appeared to fit along the lower edge of the Sarevan Charter. Elena's handwriting was old, but the detail was precise. This was not the careless scribbling of someone guessing at a mystery. It was the work of a person who had spent long hours looking at something everyone else had ignored. Then another folded page slipped from the notebook. It fell onto the marble floor. Owen bent down and picked it up. The paper had yellowed with age. Most of it had been torn away, leaving only the bottom section intact. But that was enough. At the lower edge was a red administrative note. Further review suspended pending departmental authorization. Below it was a signature, Dr. Julian Mercer. Owen handed the page to Evelyn. She read it once, then again. Mercer said the report had been preliminary. He said Elena had raised questions that could not be proven at the time. He said the department had been under pressure. The evidence had been incomplete, and the suspension had been a normal professional decision. But his explanation did not answer the real question. Why had the review been suspended instead of completed? Why had the final pages gone missing? Why had the museum continued to present the charter as proof of ownership after one of its own researchers raised doubts? And why had Mercer reacted with fear when Nadia mentioned the third fragment? Evelyn looked at the old note in her hand. Then she asked Owen to take Nadia to the archive room beneath the museum. The archive was not part of the public Arden Museum. Visitors saw marble floors, bright galleries, climate-controlled display cases, and carefully chosen labels. The archive was where the less polished history lived. It sat below the galleries behind gray doors and narrow corridors. Metal shelves held old photographs, personnel files, maintenance records, restoration logs, rejected reports, and documents that had not been touched in years. It smelled of dust, paper, cardboard, and cold metal. For Nadia, it felt strangely familiar. Her mother had once worked in rooms like that. Not under gallery lights, not beside wealthy donors. In spaces where people handled broken objects, sorted fragments, and tried to restore what time had damaged. Owen switched on the lights. Rows of shelves stretched ahead of them. At first, Nadia found only small traces of Elena, Her name appeared in old staff rosters, payroll forms, inventory lists, and repair schedules. She was described as a technician, an assistant, a support employee. Never a researcher. Never a contributor. Never someone who had asked questions important enough to threaten the museum's official story. The absence hurt more than Nadia expected. It was one thing to know that her mother had been dismissed. It was another to see how completely her work had been erased. Owen searched through boxes marked with old project names. Nadia moved slowly between cabinets, checking dates and labels. The Saravan Charter had been studied in several phases over the years. The museum had recorded every restoration material, every temperature change, every crack, every photograph. Yet somehow, the final fragment had vanished from the story. Then Nadia found a photograph. It had been taken during an excavation exhibit opening 12 years earlier. Dr. Mercer stood near the center, younger but instantly recognizable, smiling beside donors, visiting scholars, and senior museum officials. Near the edge of the picture, almost cut off by the frame, stood Elena Reyes. She was holding a padded tray. On the tray were several clay fragments. One of them was narrow and triangular. Nadia placed the photograph beside the sketch from her mother's notebook. The shapes matched. The third fragment had existed. It had been found with the charter, and at some point, it had been removed from the official record. Owen searched another shelf and found a large storage box labeled Saravan Restoration Project, 2014 to 2016. Inside were folders of condition reports, photographs, correspondence, and maintenance forms. Several gaps appeared where files should have been. Empty spaces between folders suggested that someone had removed documents long ago. But at the bottom of the box, beneath a stack of old storage logs, Owen found an envelope. Elena Reyes's handwriting covered the front. Nadia stared at it for several seconds before touching it. The envelope had survived 12 years in the museum's basement. It had survived staff changes, renovations, storage moves, and whatever effort had been made to erase Elena's work. Somehow, it had remained hidden among files no one thought important enough to destroy. Inside was a partial report. The first page carried Elena's name. The second page described the same border marks Nadia had identified in the lobby. The third page argued that the charter might be a custodial agreement rather than a transfer of ownership. The fourth page mentioned a detached fragment that could contain the final condition of the covenant. And at the bottom, in the same red ink, was the same instruction. Further review suspended. Nadia read the pages again and again. The words were not dramatic. Elena had not written with anger. She had written carefully, professionally, and with the restraint of someone who knew that evidence mattered more than emotion. But between the lines, Nadia could see her mother's loneliness. Elena had been right. She had known something was wrong. She had tried to tell people with the authority to investigate. And someone had made sure the investigation stopped. Nadia thought about the last years of her mother's life. After losing her job at Arden Museum, Elena had taken whatever work she could find. She restored damaged books for a small shop across town. She cleaned offices at night. She repaired old furniture. She translated simple letters and labels for community groups. She never returned to academic conferences. She never received another museum position. She became quieter, more tired, and more careful about what she said. But she never stopped studying. Some nights, Nadia would wake up and see light beneath the kitchen door. Her mother would be sitting at the table with a cup of cold tea, copying symbols into the leather notebook. She had never spoken much about Mercer. She had never explained exactly why she had been forced out. But once, When Nadia was still young, she had asked why her mother kept working on something that had already caused so much pain. Elena had looked up from the page and said, "The truth does not stop being true, just because powerful people are tired of hearing it." Nadia had been too young to understand. Standing in the archive room with the report in her hands, she understood at last. Evelyn arrived a few minutes later. She had been trying to keep the museum from falling apart upstairs. The Saravan Council's cars had already been seen outside. Board members were gathering in the reception hall. The legal team had asked for an update. Donors were beginning to notice that the scheduled presentation had been delayed. But when Evelyn read Elena's report, the urgent noise of the building seemed to fade. She read it once as an administrator looking for liability. Then she read it again as a person trying to understand how an institution had allowed one woman's work to disappear. The report was not reckless. It was not speculative in the careless sense Mercer had claimed. Elena had documented her observations. She had included comparative references. She had outlined what needed to be tested. She had not demanded that the museum surrender the relic immediately. She had simply asked for the truth to be examined. Evelyn looked at Nadia. For the first time that day, Nadia was no longer an unwanted visitor, a shelter girl, or an inconvenience at the worst possible moment. She was the only person in the building carrying evidence everyone else had ignored. A message came through Evelyn's phone. The Saravan Cultural Council had arrived, and somewhere inside Arden Museum, hidden beneath a false label or a forgotten display case, was the missing fragment that could expose everything Julian Mercer had spent 12 years trying to bury. The Saravan Cultural Council entered Arden Museum without anger, spectacle, or raised voices. They did not need any of those things. Their presence alone unsettled the building. The delegation included historians, preservation specialists, legal advisors, and Professor Layla Rahman, one of the most respected scholars of ancient Saravan language and law. They had traveled for years through archives, private collections, old shipping documents, and the scattered records of expeditions that had removed objects from their homeland. For generations, people from Saravan had watched museums around the world display pieces of their culture. Sacred objects had been taken from temples, burial sites, family archives, and ceremonial grounds. They had been transported across oceans, assigned new catalog numbers, placed beneath foreign lighting, and described in languages their creators would never have recognized. The world often called that preservation, but preservation without consent could become another form of theft. The Saravan Council had come to Arden Museum because the charter mattered. It was not only a tablet, it was the legal memory of an agreement made during a time of violence and uncertainty. The relic connected to it had been treated as a trophy by the museum, but to the Saravan people, it was something else entirely. It represented continuity. It represented survival. It represented a promise made by their ancestors that no institution had the right to rewrite. Dr. Mercer greeted the delegation in the reception hall with the calm professionalism that had made him famous. His voice was smooth. His posture was controlled. He intended to lead them into the presentation room, show them the museum's official interpretation, and reassure the board that everything remained under control. But Evelyn interrupted before the briefing could begin. She informed the council that new archival material had been discovered and that the museum could not ethically present a final translation until the evidence had been reviewed. Mercer's frustration appeared only briefly. To most people, he still looked composed. But Layla Rahman noticed. She had spent decades working with scholars, collectors, politicians, and museum leaders. She knew the difference between uncertainty and concealment. She knew when a person was trying to protect truth and when a person was trying to protect a reputation. Then she saw the old leather notebook in Nadia's hands. Layla stopped walking. Her eyes moved to the cracked cover, then to the faint handwriting visible on the open page. For a moment, her expression changed from professional caution to something more personal. "Elena Reyes," she said quietly. I knew her name. Nadia looked up. The room seemed to narrow around those words. Years earlier, before Elena had been forced out of Arden Museum, she had contacted Professor Layla Rahman. Elena had asked questions about the structure of old Saravan custodial agreements. She had sent a short letter describing the border marks on the charter. Layla had replied with several sources and asked for more photographs. Then the correspondence stopped. Layla had never known why. She had assumed Elena had been discouraged. She had assumed the museum had chosen a different direction. She had assumed, as people often assumed when someone disappeared quietly from an institution, that the person must have made a mistake. Now, seeing Nadia, the notebook, and the partial report, Layla understood what had really happened. Elena had been silenced. Nadia showed her the report from the archive, the old photograph, and the sketch of the triangular fragment. Layla examined them carefully. She did not rush to make a grand claim. She asked questions. She compared dates. She looked at the handwriting. She studied the directional markings drawn by Elena beside the tablet. Then she said that the evidence deserved to be taken seriously. That was enough. For the first time, Mercer was no longer controlling the conversation. Nadia remembered another detail from the notebook. The sketch of the missing fragment had been drawn beside a rough outline of the museum's upper gallery. Her mother had written a short sentence beneath it, one Nadia had never fully understood. The final promise was moved where no one would think to read it. Nadia thought of the photograph she had found in the archive. Behind Elena and Mercer, almost hidden by the group of donors, had been a familiar display case. It stood in the upper gallery beside a bronze ceremonial mask. Nadia remembered seeing it years ago when her mother had once brought her to the museum before everything changed. The clue had been there all along. The group moved toward the upper gallery. Mercer tried to stop them without seeming like he was stopping them. He argued that the museum should follow established procedure. He said the council should not be drawn into an internal archival disagreement. He suggested that the search for a missing fragment could take days, perhaps weeks, and that it would be irresponsible to make conclusions before the proper team had examined every record. But his argument only made Evelyn more certain. A man who believed the fragment did not matter would not be trying so hard to delay the search. The upper gallery was quieter than the rest of the museum. Most visitors had been redirected because of the unexpected meeting. Rain darkened the tall windows, turning the city outside into a blurred gray landscape. The bronze ceremonial mask sat behind glass at the center of the room, its surface reflecting faint gold light. Beside it was a small display case containing several fragments that had been labeled as decorative objects of uncertain origin. One of them was triangular. It was smaller than Nadia expected, smaller than the fear it had caused, smaller than the years of silence built around it. It rested on dark velvet beneath a short museum label that made it sound meaningless. Decorative clay fragment, origin uncertain. Nadia stood before the glass and felt something cold move through her chest. For 12 years, the truth had been sitting in plain sight. Visitors had walked past it. Scholars had walked past it. Donors had walked past it. Mercer had walked past it every day, knowing exactly what it was. The conservator carefully opened the case. The fragment was removed and placed beside a high-resolution image of the Saravan Charter. The shape aligned with the lower border. The clay composition looked similar. The small directional marks along one edge matched the signs Nadia had identified on the main tablet. Professor Layla leaned closer. Then she looked at Nadia. "It fits," she said. The words carried through the gallery. Mercer immediately tried to dismiss the discovery. He said that fragments could be misleading. He said that similar clay did not establish legal meaning. He said that objects from the same region could resemble each other without belonging together. But Evelyn had already requested the old catalog records. A staff member arrived with digital copies from the museum database. The history of the triangular fragment appeared on the screen. Years earlier, it had been listed as part of the Saravan Restoration Project. Then, 11 years before, its catalog number had been changed. Its link to the charter had been removed. Its classification had been rewritten. Instead of a missing section of a legal tablet, it had become a decorative fragment of uncertain origin. The authorization belonged to Dr. Julian Mercer. This time, no explanation could make the fact disappear. The fragment was taken to the research wing under the supervision of the conservator, Layla, Evelyn, and members of the Saravan Council. The charter was brought from its secure case and placed beneath specialized imaging equipment. Scholars gathered around the monitors. Lawyers stood near the doorway. Board members arrived quietly, their faces pale as they realized the museum's crisis was no longer private. Nadia stood at the edge of the room with her mother's notebook held against her chest. The same people who had ignored her in the lobby were now waiting for the evidence she had led them to reveal itself. At first, the scan showed only dark clay, scratches, and the cloudy residue of an old protective coating. The conservator adjusted the lighting frequency. The image sharpened slowly. A faint line appeared, then another. Then a sequence of symbols emerged beneath the surface, running along the narrow edge of the fragment. The room became completely still. The missing ending had been found. Professor Layla did not translate immediately. She examined the image with care. She compared the symbols to the border marks on the main charter. She followed the Guardian's path Nadia had identified. She corrected the orientation. She checked the grammar against old Saravan legal forms. It was not a miracle. It was evidence finally being allowed to speak. The charter did not describe the sacred relic as something purchased. It did not grant permanent ownership to anyone outside the Saravan community. It described the relic as an entrusted object, placed in the care of guardians during a period of danger. Those guardians had a duty to preserve it. They had a duty to protect it. And when recognized representatives of the Saravan people came forward to request its return, the agreement required the guardians to give it back. Then Layla reached the final sentence. Her voice softened as she translated the last words. The guardian who conceals this covenant, alters its meaning, or refuses the rightful return, forfeits all claim to hold what was never theirs. The words settled over the room like a verdict. The Arden Museum had never owned the relic. It had only been trusted with it, and its right to hold it had ended the moment it chose secrecy over truth. No one spoke for several seconds. The members of the Saravan Council stood quietly before the monitor. Their faces carried emotions that did not need explanation. Some looked angry. Some looked exhausted. One older historian closed his eyes, as though he had spent years waiting for the chance to hear those words spoken aloud. For them, the translation was not only a legal victory, it was proof that their ancestors had not been forgotten. The agreement had survived. The language had survived. The truth had survived, even after generations of people tried to bury it beneath labels, glass cases, and institutional certainty. Nadia looked toward Mercer. She remembered how he had looked at her when she first entered the lobby. He had seen a wet jacket, worn shoes, a torn backpack, and a girl from a shelter. He had assumed that was enough information to decide whether she mattered. He had thought he could dismiss her with polished words. He had thought Elena's name had been erased. He had thought the fragment was hidden safely behind a false label. But now the entire room was looking at him. Evelyn stepped forward with Elena's report in her hands. "Dr. Mercer, you are suspended pending an independent investigation." Mercer tried to argue that the museum could not make such a decision based on a single translation. He claimed that the council was interpreting incomplete evidence. He insisted that catalog changes could have administrative explanations. He tried to make the truth sound complicated again, because complication had protected him for years. But the evidence was no longer a single translation. It was 12 years of hidden reports. It was altered catalog records. It was a missing fragment reclassified under his authorization. It was Elena's research. It was Nadia's notebook. It was the fear on his face every time someone came too close to what he had done. No one came to defend him. The scholars who had once treated him as untouchable stood in silence. The board members avoided his eyes. The legal team began collecting documents. The Saravan Council watched with the calm dignity of people who had waited too long for the truth to be acknowledged. Mercer's career did not collapse because he lacked intelligence. It collapsed because he believed intelligence gave him the right to decide which truths mattered. He had silenced Elena because she had less power than he did. He had buried her work because it threatened his reputation. He had hidden the fragment because it threatened the museum's claim. And he had dismissed Nadia because he believed a girl from a shelter could never challenge a man with titles, money, and influence. But the truth had returned through the daughter of the woman he tried to erase. The investigation that followed was larger than anyone expected. Arden Museum announced a complete independent review of the Saravan collection. The sacred relic was removed from public display and placed under joint care, while arrangements were made for its return. The museum agreed to work with the Saravan Cultural Council to review every artifact connected to the original expedition. More documents were found in the weeks that followed. There were internal emails showing that Mercer had discouraged staff from revisiting Elena's work. There were catalog revisions with no proper explanation. There were notes from meetings where concerns about ownership had been minimized because donors had invested heavily in the Saravan exhibit. Mercer had not acted alone in every decision, but he had been the person with the power to make silence look official. His suspension became permanent. His academic appointments were reviewed. His published work was questioned. The museum removed his name from several public materials while the investigation continued. The punishment was not dramatic in the way people expected from stories. There was no public shouting. No one dragged him through the lobby. No one needed to. The truth did something more lasting. It took away the authority he had used to control others. The museum issued a public correction. Elena Reyes's name was restored to the official history of the Saravan Charter. Her report was digitized, preserved, and acknowledged as the first internal research to identify the document as a custodial covenant rather than a transfer of ownership. For years, her work had existed only in a worn notebook and a hidden envelope. Now it became part of the record. A research grant was created in Elena Reyes's name for young people from underrepresented communities who wanted to study history, languages, preservation, archaeology, and cultural heritage. The museum's board did not create the grant because it could erase the past. Nothing could do that. They created it because the future had to become different. Nadia did not become rich overnight. She did not suddenly appear on magazine covers or receive a perfect new life from strangers who had ignored her before. That would not have been honest. Her problems did not disappear, because one day changed everything. But the day did change the direction of her life. She received a paid internship with the joint Serivan-Arden Preservation Project. The position came with transportation support, educational guidance, and stable housing assistance through a youth transition program. For the first time in a long time, Nadia had a place to go that did not feel temporary. She also had a future that did not depend on someone else deciding she belonged. Professor Layla became one of her mentors. She did not treat Nadia as a miracle or a symbol. She treated her as a young person with knowledge, patience, and a deep connection to the work her mother had begun. She taught Nadia how to verify evidence, how to question assumptions, and how to let facts speak louder than anger. Nadia listened carefully, but she never forgot the lesson she had already learned from Elena. Sometimes the most important thing a person can do is refuse to let the truth become invisible. Months later, Nadia returned to the archive room beneath Arden Museum. The room still smelled of dust, paper, and old metal shelves, but it no longer felt like a place where forgotten stories were buried. A new workstation had been set up near the window. There were digitization tools, preservation folders, and neatly labeled boxes waiting to be cataloged. Nadia entered with her own identification badge. This time, she did not come through the side door hoping someone would let her stay. She belonged there. On her desk sat her mother's old leather notebook beside a new archival folder. The label read, Elena Reyes Collection. Nadia opened the notebook to the first page. There, in faded handwriting, was a sentence her mother had written years before. The truth is often hidden in the part everyone else ignores. For years, Nadia had thought those words were only about old symbols and forgotten documents. Now she understood that they were about people too. They were about the quiet worker no one bothered to credit. They were about the poor girl no one thought was worth listening to. They were about the community whose history had been carried away and renamed by strangers. They were about the small fragment everyone walked past because they had already decided it could not matter. The world often judges people by clothes, titles, money, addresses, and appearances. But wisdom does not always arrive wearing the shape people expect. Sometimes it comes carrying a torn backpack. Sometimes it stands quietly in the rain. And sometimes, the person everyone overlooks is the one carrying the truth that changes everything.